Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Board of Health meeting for June 18th. It is 7 o'clock and time for us to begin. We are going to begin with a couple of variance hearings. The first of these is for 6 Malcolm Street. And so that variance hearing is now called to order. It is my duty to inform the applicant that you've got to provide the Board of Health with data to support your request for a waiver from our requirements, and that if you don't receive the waiver, it'll do you manifest injustice. You've also got to show that what you intend to do is environmentally acceptable. So, who is the applicant?
How you doing? My name is Jim Neva from Dunham Mackenzie.
All right, we need a microphone for you. Why don't you grab one of these?
Hi, my name is Jim Neva from Dunham Mackenzie Engineering and Surveying. We're proposing to upgrade a septic system that the system is about close to 40, maybe 50 years old at this point. It's a cesspool, so we're proposing to put some Caltex units in and eliminate a cesspool that is failing at this point. So I'm looking for a variance, 3 variances. One, the distance to a groundwater. So instead of 5 feet, I'm asking to go to 4.1 foot to the groundwater, because it's less than 2 minutes an inch soil. So, and then I'm asking for relief for the septic tank to come closer to the existing dwelling, because the lot itself is very small, so we're trying to accommodate the lot in the house without ruining the yard. And the third one is to get relief from this soil, from the septic system itself to the foundation. We're trying to get a variance from 20 feet to 19.1 feet, so a 9/10 fluctuation. So
Those are the 3 things.
those are the 3 items.
Okay. All right. Wayne, do you have any recommendations for us?
Yes, thank you. Since the peer review that was emailed to you, a revision came in regard to 5 feet, 4 feet distance to groundwater. When we originally reviewed the plan, there's 2 test holes on site, and the design engineer used a lower elevation for groundwater distance. So where in the designs you use the most stringent elevation, it was like maybe 9 inches higher or so. So it prevented the board even to act on it, because you can only allow 1 foot variance distance, and perk rates at less than 2 minutes per inch. So I contacted Jim, and he did some really quick work, actually really good work. Went out there and he revised the plan, which we have here, and he moved the sewer pipe in the house, lifted it up so he could actually bring the system up higher, so the board could act on 1 foot 1 foot variance to groundwater. So, if you read my report, you can act on these variances, and I recommend that you do so. So the house can be upgraded. Any questions?
I don't. Are there any abutters or concerned citizens who have anything to add to what has been discussed here? I'm not hearing anything. Questions from the board?
No, I think that Wade just answered my question, so.
So,
Is there a motion?
I make a motion that we accept all of these modifications.
Okay, so
Do I
grant
have
the
to read them?
variances.
Do I have to read each one of them?
No,
Okay, that we would grant a variance
so all three variances.
for 6 Malcolm Street for all 3 variances.
Is there a second?
I second the motion.
Further discussion?
Babe,
All in favor?
aye.
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 Thank you.
Okay then. Good luck with the project.
We've got a few minutes before the next.
Right. So, we could do some housekeeping maybe.
Minutes?
Some minutes. Um,
So which minutes are first?
So we have minutes from March 5th and April 23rd,
March
somewhere in the stack.
Around the bottom.
March 5th.
I got the 23rd. Oh, there's the 5th. Kind of like right in front of me. Are there any issues to raise with the minutes? I guess in the case of March 5th, actually in the case of both of them, you don't get a chance to vote on
I
these.
do not. I was not an official member.
I make a motion that we accept the minutes of the Board of Health meeting from March 5th, 2019, and the minutes of the Board of Health meeting from April 23rd, 2019.
Okay, let's divide that into 2 motions, and I'll
Okay.
certainly entertain the first one. I will second. I assume you have no
March 5th.
further. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Then, the other motion is for April 23rd.
April 23rd. I make a motion that we accept the minutes of the Board of Health meeting for April 23rd, 2019.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And then, guess I don't understand this. Are
We
these
we gotta
new?
slow down here, we're going too
Executive.
fast.
Are these new? Vote to release the past executive session minutes?
No.
That's not-
That was just a carryover. If you look at your agenda, it's not on there.
Oh, okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
it was
Yes, I'm
just-
sorry, I'm looking at agenda that I printed. Okay, thank you.
That was just never taken off from the last meeting.
Okay.
Well, we still got 5 more minutes, let's do some more business. Board reorganization. Since we have had an election, and we now have a new member, welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Is there any thought on who should be the chair, who should be the secretary for the year ahead?
I don't have a problem with the way that it stands.
Me either.
Status quo is okay?
Fine with me.
All right,
Sounds
in
good.
that
If
case,
you knew, I'd be afraid to change to a different position at this very minute.
all right. So is there a motion for,
Maintaining the current organization
All
of
right.
the board?
maintain the current organization? That's a simple motion. Is there a second to that
I
motion?
second that motion.
All right. I guess there's no discussion to speak of, so all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we continue as is. Next, appointing a representative to the zoning working committee. Is that me?
It might have been you, yes.
I think it was Jeff.
Oh, it was Jeff,
Oh,
you're
It was
right.
Jeff.
Well, there's
But
a
I-
working committee. is
You
different.
were on the zoning working committee, which is now kind of transformed into the B1 zoning working committee. So,
Okay. But is it the same cast of characters, or are the new folks
it's
coming?
new
in?
folks,
No,
it's
It's new folks.
new people.
That's fine.
Good.
But Jeff is gone now.
I know, so we need
So
a
we
new
need
rep.
a
We need a new rep for the Board of Health.
Representative
Anybody
to
interested?
zoning working committee.
I went to one meeting, but I'm not interested in being the representative,
was
even though
enough,
it was
is that what you
very,
said?
Oh, blame you.
no, even though it was very interesting, but I just feel like with the MRC
Yeah.
Yeah.
and the EDS plan, I've got my hands full.
You're continuing on the MRC too, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And I
And
don't
we
know if it's a
both
conflict
have-
of interest, but my husband's on the planning board. So I'm not sure I
That's
can.
okay.
That's okay.
No,
Yeah.
it's not a
This is
conflict.
more
All
like
right.
the zoning board and the board and the
All right.
building commissioners.
Actually, Gary, I wonder if he is our rep. He might be our rep for the planning board.
It might be. It was Rich McCarthy. Is it Rich?
Yeah. Rich is spearheading it.
All right. Well, in the efforts of trying to sort of equalize the workload here, I'm okay with working on that one, if nobody else really wants the job. Which kinda
It's
sounds
very
like it.
interesting, actually.
It is pretty interesting.
gonna like it.
I'm not sure how much work it would take in addition to the Medical Reserve Corps.
Yeah. Well, they're both significant tasks. A lot depends upon just what's being proposed for B1. Actually, that's a good point. Betsy, do you have any sort of feel for what they're up to these days on that study group?
I know Rich said that they were trying to schedule a meeting for July 16th, but don't quote me on that one.
Okay, so we got some things to do.
Yes. Actually, I think we have some significant zoning changes that are coming up.
Well, here's a question. We need a representative. It doesn't necessarily have to be a member of the board, right?
Right.
We just need to appoint somebody representing the board.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I tell you what, since I don't have anybody in mind,
Well,
they're meeting in July, so we probably should do something now.
Yeah, they're trying to get some zoning changes together for fall, so.
Yeah, that's the zoning town meeting. Well, I tell you what, I'd be willing to certainly serve in that capacity.
Do you want to share? You can't make it, I'll make it, or can we share a position? We should point,
Yeah, well, yeah.
just
I
somebody
mean, if
from the
we're
Board of Health shows
away.
up?
in
Does
the
it have to be
meantime,
official?
we could post on the Board of Health website that we're looking for a representative to act on our behalf.
How about this? How about we send out a call right now via cable TV and whatever other sources we have, that the Board of Health would be very interested in hearing from anybody who would like to represent the board on the B1 zoning working committee. And if nobody is really interested in the job, and we need to have somebody represent us in July, I'll go.
I'm not sure what the makeup of this working committee is, because I know that there are a couple of people from the community already.
There's
So-
they have two,
Do they have-
community members, so I think it should be a member of the, I think
Yeah, it
it's
might have
a
to
member
be.
from each board.
Okay.
That's the way it's set up.
Well, it was a good
Even
idea.
after we had this
And I'm
discussion.
trying to get out of it, but.
It's all right, I'll do it.
No, you're pretty busy already.
We talk about
MRC's
it at the dinner table, so,
Really?
Yeah.
Want to?
sure,
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
you're welcome.
You wanna make that?
So in that case,
Just,
is
do
there
we
a
have to
motion?
make a motion to appoint? I make a motion that we appoint Eileen as the B1 zoning working committee member from the Board of Health.
I will happily
Representative.
second that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Not sure I can
Aye.
vote for myself, thank you.
Yes,
Yes, you may.
sure.
All right. So Eileen is our representative. All right, now it is 1:15, and it's time for us to go on to our next variance hearing. So this one has to do with a septic system upgrade at 4 Spring Street. And I have the official preamble to read. I've already heard it, John, but we're going to hear it again. This hearing of the Board of Health regulation, a hearing from Board of Health Regulations is called to order for 4 Spring Street. It is my duty to inform you that you'll have to provide the board with data to support your request for a waiver from our requirements, and that if you don't receive the waiver, it'll do manifest injustice. You've also got to show that what you intend to do is environmentally acceptable. Mr. Glossa, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, good evening. For the record, my name is John Glossa, Glossa Engineering, 46 East Street in East Walpole. And I'm representing the Leveroni Realty Trust, so it's Barbara Leveroni. I think her maiden name is, or her married name is Brescia. She lives on King Street, but this is the house that she grew up in at 4 Spring Street. So Spring Street, if we went back heading towards Walpole and we took a right on Needham Street and then took a right on Spring Street, I think it's the second house in on the right. And that end of Spring Street, it's kind of low, and some places the soils are okay, but other places not so good. We've done a few right in this area here. So the family is in the process of selling the house, and they hired me to do soil testing and do a septic system plan for them. It's an existing cesspool that will be replaced by this system. So what this system consists of is a septic tank, a pump chamber, and then a leach bed using Presby Enviro septic pipe. The reason we're doing that is to try to limit the size of, or the height of the mounds behind the house. As you can see, the lot's fairly flat, and everything is actually flowing from left to right here. So, and that's important because Wade had some questions, so I did send my guys out to do a little more topo on the abutting lots, just to make sure that we weren't creating a dam and blocking water coming from the abutting lots. That's the system. We're 2 feet above the water table, so we're asking for a variance or a waiver from 310 CMR 15.104 and 105, which are the 2 sections that require a percolation test. So when we dug down here back in May 2nd, we had water table at 28 inches and 32 inches, so well up into the B layer, even above the C layer. So there really was no opportunity to provide a good perk test for the design. So we took a sample. I use Thilch Engineering in Cranston, Rhode Island. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, they bought GZA's lab, so they're a big soil materials testing outfit, and they came back with both samples as sandy loam. So by the policy of the DEP, the sandy loam translates into a 0.33 loading rate, long-term acceptance rate, which essentially would be a 30-minute perk rate, which is relatively conservative, but we don't really have any choice. And Wade can verify this, but we actually had one sort of diagonally across the street where we did the same thing, and we came in front of the board, and then before we built it, we went back and actually had a percolation rate which, had the loading rate cut in half. So instead of 0.33, we were using 0.66. So should this, water table drop significantly, we may try to go back here and actually do a perk test at some point. But I believe that the design is approvable, and that the waiver request is something that the board can approve. They really don't have any other choice right now, and they would like to sell the house in the selling season. And then, as I said, you can see we put a bunch of spot grades around, but all of the abutting lots are actually higher, and this water here, surface water will flow out and then down towards the front this way, and surface water here will flow out and down to, there's a low area behind this building, behind the abutting house. So it's all flowing off of the site, not creating any problems with the neighbors, and sort of following the drainage patterns that exist there today. So I guess with that, Mr. Chairman, I could answer any questions that you or the board members might have.
Let me just ask one for clarifications. So that's, as you're leaving Needham Street and going down Spring Street, this is on the right?
On the right side. So I think it's
Okay.
the second house on the right as you're coming in from Needham Street,
So the water flow you're talking about is basically heading toward Needham Street?
towards Needham Street, yeah.
Okay. Wayne, do you have some comments for us?
Well, this is a case where the state has innovative alternative designs. It's a big toolbox for a lot of the engineers who are working with wastewater. And this particular design allows you to design 2 feet above groundwater, design right. The state's already approved it, like a generic approval. And it's a wet area. And during the testing, as I mentioned in my peer review, was that we hit water and we physically couldn't do a percolation test. So the state does have a policy where you can take grab samples and go to a lab and break it into silt, clay, and sand, and it classifies it. And this went into a sandy loam. And then it gives you a generic long-term acceptance rate, which this one boosts up to the highest rate that you could design on. And so you have a maximum, a maxed out or an over-designed septic system due to sieve analysis. And that's what you have before you. So for the plan to go ahead, the local Board of Health has to recognize that a sieve analysis was performed for the design. And I did write in my peer review that you could wait if you wanted to, if the homeowner found, well, it's a maximum size you have for that type of soils. It's a cost factor. And I just brought it on the table that you could wait for the groundwater to drop to go out to do a physical percolation test. And this type of soil, you could probably cut the system in half. But there are reasons why people want to go ahead with this, with the lab testing, because maybe they have a transfer of property, they don't want to pay for the extra money going back there again and reperking it. That's costly because it has to be witnessed again, backhoe and the engineer's time. And then you have to also wait for the groundwater to drop. And groundwater is, 28 inches. We probably have to put a little pipe in the ground and monitor it once in a while, and that takes time and money for someone to do that. And then when the water table drops enough, you go back and do a percolation test. So the sieve analysis is a reasonable and probably affordable, at least on time, field time of getting a design year-round on properties, plus on fail systems.
So this is on the same area, the new design is just modifying the same area? Is it making the septic system larger, or is it, it's not?
Well, if a percolation test was done, we get a perk rate of the soil, the permeability of the soil. And whatever the perk rate is, you put into a chart, and then you give you a number and you calculate it out. If you do a sieve analysis, what it does, it determines if the soil is compacted or non-compacted. And then with the breakdown of the soils, it puts into a classification. And then whatever classification is, it's the largest long-term acceptance rate that's available.
Is this the same spot where the
Yes.
septic system is right now?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Is it gonna be bigger?
It's a cesspool.
Well, it's the same spot that the system,
I think
yeah.
the cesspool's right in here.
Yeah.
So alls we're doing is doing a sieve analysis, which, a grain size analysis, looking at how big the size of the soil particles are, and then taking that and using that to fix the perk rate, essentially. But you can see, well, maybe you can't, but from what Wade and I did, or at least what I did, was I call both of the C layers loamy sand. And we're actually designing on sandy loam. So I know that might not mean a lot to you, but it means we're designing on a system, we're designing on a perk rate which is a lot more conservative based on the sieve analysis, or based on the soil evaluation that I did. So for a loamy sand, usually we would figure a perk rate of 10 minutes an inch or less, and we're designing this on 30 minutes. So if you want to make it a condition of approval, that's fine. That should we find at some time prior to construction that we can do a perk test there and redesign it, that's fine with me, because I've already said that, as we did across the street, which wasn't a sale, so we had plenty of time, but that makes sense, because this is fine, 30 minutes an inch, believe me, from your point of view, and I'm not trying to sell you anything, this is fine, but from the owner's point of view, who's gonna pay for this, if I can go back and get a 10-minute perk rate, and this becomes half the size that it is now, it costs less money, so we don't have a problem with that condition, but right now they wanna sell the house, so they need an approval so that they can go forward, tell any potential buyer that they have an approved septic system and go forward from there, so.
Does this modification affect any future renovations of the home?
Well, it doesn't really, Title V, if they wanted, this is a 4-bedroom house, if they wanted to add bedrooms, they would have to meet all the requirements of Title V, so someone would have to start over, but I don't think that that's really gonna happen. So to answer your question, it really doesn't have any effect on the house going forward, on the home going forward.
Well, if we vote to grant the variance, nothing prevents you from coming back. If, for example, later on, water table finally drops, and you can always ask for a resubmission.
Yeah, if we don't need the variance, then we just deal with weight. This is exactly what, and it was 10, this is 4, so it must have been 11 or 9 Spring Street. We came in front of you, got the variance, and then, I think so. But anyway, in either case, we went and did the sieve analysis, and then finally we decided, because the water table had dropped, that we were gonna come back. The only thing I can tell you is, based on the way it's, the climate, the precipitation we're getting, it's unlikely that's gonna drop here.
Yep.
So
Not
this
this
is
year.
probably how it's gonna get built.
Yep.
So, and again, at least, from someone who's done a lot of these, this is a nice conservative design. It's because we're using the Presby, it's not really all that outrageous in its appearance when it's done. It won't look that terrible. It will be raised up somewhat, but it's not gonna look like somebody tried to bury an elephant in the backyard here. So I think it's a palatable plan. If we do more soil testing, that's not gonna change anyway, the height of this, so.
Okay, all right. Further discussions? Is there a motion?
So, I motion that we approve the variance, and there are 3 conditions under the variance.
There's sections 15-104 and 15-105, right,
Well,
John?
they're the same thing. It's just the 2 sections that require a percolation test, so.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
we're basically saying you haven't got to do a perk test.
Yeah.
That's what we're saying.
So I make
Um,
a motion that we approve the variance,
Okay.
accept the
Is there a second
percolation.
on
I second the motion.
that? Further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. All right, so that brings us to 7:30, which actually brings us to another public hearing. But this one is about our proposed tobacco regulations. So there's been a posting of the proposed regulations. Has been any response directly back to the board?
Not from the public. So you just need to open the hearing and you read the notice of hearing into the
Yep.
public record.
Yeah. All right, well, it is 7:30, so why don't we begin on this last hearing? Which is to consider an amendment to the existing regulations of the Norfolk Board of Health restricting the sale of tobacco products regulations. The proposed amendment would prohibit the sale of flavored tobacco products except in smoking bars and adult-only tobacco stores. The proposed amendment to the regulation is available for review, or has been available for review on the town website and in the Board of Health office during regular business hours, and we have welcomed any input from residents or businesses in Norfolk, and we still do so. So, public hearing is now open. Is there anybody who would like to speak about what is being proposed here? Would you please identify yourself and grab a microphone?
I've got two of them, so. Excuse my parents, I've been running around all day, but it was important that I be here today. My name is Jennifer Wynn. I live on Hemlock Lane. Some of you know me. I just wanted to say thank you to the board because I know how long you've been studying these regulations as well as other towns' regulations and listening to professional research as well as studying current case law. And I've read over the regulations and I just want to say thank you. I know that many of my town community members have also emailed Betsy. I'm sure she shared it with you as well over the past few months. So I just want to say thank you for your time and your consideration. Because as a parent, a middle school teacher, and a school committee member, I know firsthand how this is an epidemic, and it's very important to me that we take the health of our citizens seriously. So thank you for keeping updated on what's going on.
Thank you. Other comments? Yes, sir.
May I approach you with some information?
And a microphone. So we all can hear you. Actually, if you want to sit down.
This might be better.
Yeah.
Let me put these here so you can see the fun products that kids play with. And I forgot. Oh, yes, I have it. I just got these from Norwood the day before yesterday. I hang out at vape shops. I'm asking on your proposal to rethink that there are two flavors that are not.
But we got to be able to hear you at home, so you
Okay.
can
Yep,
use
yep.
the mic.
I'll sit down here.
Oops.
Hello? Is that working? In 2009, flavors were banned in flavored cigarettes, the candied cigarettes and everything. The industry convinced the FDA not to include.
You should introduce yourself, Dr. Hartman.
Oh, so sorry. I'm Dr. Lester Hartman. I'm a pediatrician, 33 years in practice, senior associate at Westwood Mansfield Pediatrics, and take care of about 75 to 100 kids in this town. So, and then also, so I'm going to ask for these back so I don't kill so many trees.
This is an extra.
In 2009, the FDA caved to the industry and restricted mint and exempted mint and menthol as well. And the industry has its ulterior motives to it, and I'll explain in what I have here for you. I will go through this in about 3 minutes, so it'll be a fast representation. This is all about mint and menthol. I can guarantee you when you put these regs into place, if you don't have mint and menthol in there and restrictions on what comes into your town, you will have no different a problem than you presently have now. Because I've been in towns now, and mint is the #1 or #2 flavor in the high schools at this point, in the middle schools. And KP has one of the worst problems in the state, has been on CNN twice. And 50% of 8th graders, I did a coffee there. I was told by your resource officer that 50% of 8th graders had vaped. Moore Healy, who I work with as well, with Dr. Winikoff, has had complaints about 4th and 5th graders vaping now, particularly around Juul, the product right in the middle there. And that's not the Juul, that's the Novo. That's the Juul. And then, did I show you? And that's the Soren, okay? And that's one of the flavors. That one, that's not the menthol. I didn't bring the menthol.
Menthol.
This is nice. This smells like
Menthol.
Yeah.
bakery products.
Yes. Well, that's what it is. Drink 2 teaspoons of that and you die. It's a nicotine overdose. you'll get with this. And that is menthol. I just got that from the Norwood Vape Shop. So there are 151 towns, and I'll give you the map on that, who have gone with flavors. 4 towns that border you now have restricted their flavors. 2 in the area, 1 borders you, Walpole, has done the next step, in which you're kind of 2 steps behind Walpole now. They restricted all flavors, including mint and menthol flavors. And that's what I'm asking you to do with this, because I just don't think it's going to be nearly as effective until you do this. So there are a list of communities here that's going to be in your packet. There are 11 communities now that have done mint and menthol. I've done a survey already around the boards of health, and 17 more towns are interested in this from the survey, and about 5 that I've spoken with as well. And I've spoken at about 10, 15 schools, including KP twice with this. I don't like when things profit from kids and hurt kids. And Juul hurts kids. And 1/3 of its stock is now funded by Philip Morris. So they bought 1/3 of the stock. So let's start with this after I showed you the towns here. The next one is, according to CDC, Massachusetts is the 9th worst state for teen vaping rates in the country. Teens in elementary school youths are now vaping at a rate 6 times that of adults in Massachusetts. While last year's youth risk behavioral surveillance survey showed 42% of kids had tried vape in high schools, this figure, I believe, is grossly underestimating, because it says within the last 30 days. If you said ever at all, it's about 80%. And I know because I talked to 14,000 kids in my practice, and the males almost all of them have tried by far. And if you look, I mentioned about the FDA here already, and if you look on average, menthol smokers delay quitting 20% longer than non-mentholated cigarette users. It's a more pleasant smoking. Boston and the state are moving towards a ban on all flavored, all-age nicotine products, including mint, menthol, and wintergreen, to 21 smoke shops, and may enact even further restrictions that they're looking at now to ban completely. San Francisco has banned all flavors. There are towns in San Francisco and California that are pouring through that now to ban all flavors. And Brookline has already done it, you'll see. And I've mentioned about the 14,000. Exposure in convenience stores do matter. There is clear data that kids who go to convenience stores frequently are twice as likely to use tobacco-based products. You pull these out, they're not so interested. And yes, 75% is still in retail stores, even though the internet is there. And remember, I'll show you, Maura Healy, we're working with, is working very closely at what's happening with Juul and other products like this, writing letters for cease and desist for the 2 most common internet distributors of vape. And we just had discovered that in Amazon Prime sends products to Whole Foods now, and kids can have, if they have a tag where they've ordered it, they can go to the front of the store, hand them the tag, go in and get their Juul products. That's just been stopped, and we think, although we don't know, we think that Maura Healy had a big effect on that when she wrote a letter there in regards to that. Yeah, smokers. Youth smokers remain the age group which most likely to use menthol cigarettes. Nothing will happen, okay, with this bill that's in the House and Senate now until a majority of the towns go to this banning. So I will be back here in 3 months if you don't do it. I promise you. I will be back, all right? Sharon was going to do the same thing that you did. Sarah McColgan, myself, and Mary Cole came in, and they've done the whole shebang. They have restricted mint and menthol, which they don't have any vape stores, and you can talk about cap and winnowing permits as well. I'm no expert on that. They are, okay? They will tell you. But that's the bill, 1279. Look at it, and you'll see that it's an important bill, that if you do your part in all this, we will successfully get rid of all flavored products in the state of Massachusetts. Again, bold leadership is needed, As I said, the internet regulations with Maura Healey are under effect. Businesses can morph, and you know, it's interesting. I was just over here at Dunkin' Donuts, and I'm seeing they put in a Baskin & Robbins. I own my business, okay? We've 70 employees now and started out with 6, 33 years ago. And I know what it requires to stay as a pediatrician in this state through technology I have to improve on, the amount of money I have to put out to improve things. Dunkin' Donuts is adding a Baskin & Robbins. This is a creative idea that convenience stores can do, even if they complain about loss of income, because I'm here for the kids. I make no money doing this. They profit from those kind of things as well. Anyway, let's keep going. Menthol creates a cooling effect. It reduces the harshness of cigarette smoke and suppresses coughing. These effects make menthol cigarettes and vaping flavors, which you have the menthol vape there, more appealing to youth, inexperienced smokers. So as I said, there is the menthol. Does banning menthol have any effect? The answer is yes. And I have some papers I can supply for you, the Ontario papers, where they banned completely for adults and kids, all right? And this was a study for adults, and it doubled the quit rate of adults using menthol with doing that. And what I'd like to urge you to do, this was a quote from Dr. Winikoff, the Harvard professor I work with, who's been published in the New England Journal, JAMA, and Pediatrics as well, and I can supply you if you'd like. With the papers he's done. What harm does menthol cause? As I told you, anesthetizing the throat. Nicotine does the rest for addiction. For example, in Juul, there's benzoic acid in it. That increases the addiction, lowers the pH in the lungs, creates a higher level of nicotine in the bloodstream, and causes a big head rush. I talk to the kids all the time, and the kids who are addicted have these huge head rushes. Remember, probably 28% of kids are now probably addicted by senior year to this garbage, okay? Juul was rated by the FDA because it lies about what it's done. It says we want just adults to do it. Well, if you look up the Juul launch parties 2015, these aren't 50, 60-year-old adults that need to get off. These are 20-something and even teenagers, it looks like, although I don't know their ages, that are doing it. And they are enticing, saying one thing to us and another to individuals in social media. In fact, Juul has been on homework apps, and Maura Healey sent a letter out saying cease and desist, putting this on a homework app that kids use. So nicotine does the rest with the addiction. Menthol makes it easier. So the part is, please remember that we are a community. We're a much bigger community than just your town. And the African-American population, 90% of kids who start with menthol. And the African-American Tobacco Leadership Control Council in Oakland, a professor there, Gardner, they have banned these products from Sacramento right now. And I mentioned about Juul and benzoic acid here. Dr. Winikoff says eliminating sales of flavored tobacco, which is 95% of what kids use, is flavored. And about 85% of kids who said they would not smoke or vape if they didn't have flavors in them. Limiting sales of flavored tobacco is a necessary move at this critical time, given the 78% in adolescent electronic cigarette use and the reversal of decades of progress in tobacco. And that 78% was 1 year. And that's why the FDA is getting more concerned. Dr. Gottlieb left. The theory behind it, nobody knows, but there's some concerns. He got a lot of pressure from the administration around the issue of controlling tobacco more. And if you look at 2018, we were supposed to be regulating these products. And when the new administration came in, it was changed to 2022. So we got a generation of kids becoming addicted to it. Juul and other vaping devices, they're not adult smoking cessation devices. They are truly nicotine addiction initiation devices. 95% of people who use nicotine begin before the age of 21, 90% before the age of 18. It is well known that the brain is extremely vulnerable and thirsty to nicotine at that age. By 25, not so much. So I offer to you that I ask you to put this amendment in. I also have a small package to give you quickly to consider. I was doing this in my kitchen, so I got a little grease on this one, so my apology.
I'll take the grease here.
And let's, for the board too.
Thank you.
If you wouldn't mind.
Do you want these?
And then I'm going to Norwood tomorrow, who is planning to restrict mint and menthol to vape shops. They have 2 vape shops. But cap and winnowing is the best way to avoid getting vape shops in. And I am not the speaker of that. That is far more legal than I know. This has some of the papers I'm talking about, and it also includes the map. I wish I could give you this, but I gotta go to Norwood tomorrow and talk to them with this. Printing, my poor printer is just dying. If there are any questions, I'm more glad to answer them for you, and I will step out. And I hope you hear from this, I think the school superintendent's here, and who else from KP's here? Anybody else? I've seen these gentlemen before. They may have seen me at some of the talks I gave. I think they are the bellwether of your town. If you want to hear what's happening here, and by the way, the first time I talked to the parents there, Jewel came and saw me speaking, and they gave a Jewel education packet to them to help prevent kids from getting to Jewel. Well, it was like when the gun people did Eddie the Eagle. They made kids actually more interested than less. And Maura Healy actually has copies of their curriculum and has been studying it, and actually has sued Jewel, the first attorney general to state attorney general to sue Jewel in the United States. So I hope you will consider this very closely. And I believe you're a veterinarian.
I am a veterinarian.
Yeah, I am a vet of one species. I'm I do kids. But I don't know if I've looked at some things around toxicity to dogs too. And it can be pretty severe. Quarter teaspoon.
I can imagine that stuff that smells like cake.
Yes.
Yeah, that could be a problem.
That real problem. And quarter teaspoon of these things can kill a 2-year-old.
I actually went on the Jewel website because I have Sirius XM radio in my car,
Yeah.
and they had a Jewel advertisement about youth prevention.
Yeah,
and their website, they talk about wanting to restrict it to over 21, and they're going to take away some of the flavors, but that did not include mint and menthol.
Yeah, it didn't, and that's what's in your stores now, and it's all smoke and screen, mirrors and smoke and mirrors, because they don't really care, because what they're doing behind the scene is stopping preemption, adding preemption. In other words, the states now can preempt the boards of health or the counties in their state. That's not going to happen here. But then they'll talk about 21. But if they get that, that's really going to help them. There's no doubt the internet's a huge part of this in a lot of ways, but also illegal, probably, we don't know for sure, illegal selling in stores, not intentional by the owners, but I can't imagine your compliance checks really are able to know what's going on 24 hours a day when you have brief compliance checks. So thank you very much, and I'm here to help at all. I'll come back and speak with you again. Tomorrow I'm at Norwood, next week I'm at Brockton, and the week after that I'm at Lowell. And then I'm scheduling for the fall as well. And I have a bunch of talks to give. I'm not stopping because I got really angry when we had done 21, and I was on the floor of the House when it passed this summer. But when I saw this blow us out the window, Senator Lewis said that we had to go back on the trail again to talk about this. And please consider this. It's pretty simple to put in. Sarah McColgan can tell you that, but the cap and winnow, that probably will take a little more work. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yes, may I grab those from you too?
Oh, the props.
Oh. I wouldn't know what to do with it.
So, dual pods are now the cigarette butts. consider that the cigarette
I've
butts.
seen them everywhere,
Yeah.
playgrounds included.
Well, and they're also toxic because they have chips in them, you know, computer chips, heavy
That's right,
metals in
because
it.
you can plug them into your computer to recharge them. Interesting.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
You're very, very welcome. Yes, please, could you come up?
Not very
Thank-
comfortable fighting out of here, but thank you.
Grab a seat.
Take the seat as well, thank you.
Yep.
I promise not to take as much time. But
That's okay.
I do feel it's important for me to come in before you and speak for just a moment or two. My name is Paul Zinni, and for those of you I have not met yet, I am your new superintendent for King Philip. I'm just finishing my first year here in the district. And so I want to thank you tremendously for taking the time to look at this issue and to really to give it some thought, and to tell you how much we support it at the school level. I am a little concerned. I want to make sure that we have some stats that are correct, because if we're taping this and people are viewing at home, I want to make sure that people in the community know that while e-cigarettes and this topic is very concerning to us at the school, we are at about the state average. We're not tremendously above the state average. We're definitely not below the state average. We are right about at the state average. We do an assessment, a survey every 2 years of our students in grades 7 through 12, the Metro West survey. And it talks to our students or asks them about many behaviors that they may be engaging in that we would consider dangerous. Alcohol, drug use, tobacco use. E-cigarettes have now been added over the last 6 years. Sexual behavior, all of those kinds of risky behaviors that we want to know about and are working so very hard to keep our students safe. And so what we are seeing at the district level is that our stats pretty much across the board are mirroring the state average. And I think that's important because sometimes we hear out in the community people talking about the schools being out of control when they're not in the schools. The schools are right at where the state is seeing the same kind of behavior. That said, the behavior is very troubling. And so we are looking at pretty much flat statistics around alcohol use, around drug use, and in fact, we've seen a drop over the last 10 years in tobacco use. It has consistently gone down, and it's probably at its lowest point since we've been doing this survey for the last 10 years. The one area that we're seeing a dramatic increase is around e-cigarettes. And so in our survey this last year, what we had identified at the middle school level was at least 10% of our students identified that they are using e-cigarettes at some time. And we know at the high school level, it was 41%, which is up by 10% from just 4 years ago. So that, to me, is dramatic that we're seeing that kind of climb. And what we are seeing is that climb is happening with each grade as those students are getting older. So the older they are, the more likely they are to be using. So when we say 41% of the high school, if we actually broke that figures down, and I do have all of those stats, which we didn't want to, bore you with this evening, but it's important for you to know, the juniors and seniors are using at much higher rates, the younger they are, which would make sense, as we would suspect. But regardless of what age they're starting, we know that there's evidence out there that when students start addictive types of behavior while their brains are still developing, they're more likely to continue with those addictive types of behavior. And that kind of stat I would turn to the good doctor to give you more information on. But for us, it's becoming a real problem trying to keep our kids away from these kinds of behaviors. Other substances were easier for us to detect. When students were smoking in the bathroom, you walk by the bathroom, you could smell that cigarette smoke billowing out. We knew to step in and we knew to deal with that. The vaping kinds of behavior is so subtle and happens so quickly that it's almost impossible for us to catch. It's happening in our bathrooms, it's happening in our hallways, it's happening in our classrooms. You saw how tiny these devices are. We have kids who are literally sticking them in their sweatshirts, breathing in, as the teacher turns to write on the chalkboard. We don't have chalkboards anymore, we now have whiteboards. I'm dating myself here, showing my age. But I think you understand what I'm saying here. And so while I recognize that this may have an impact on our businesses in our community, it's having an impact as well on our students. And so anything we can do to keep these products out of our children's hands as long as possible, I support at this point. And you know, I'm doing the talking here, but I also have Mr. Kip Lewis, who's one of our assistant principals at the high school. He's the person who's dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. He's the one who's running into the bathrooms. He's the one, you know, catching these kids in the hall. He's the one calling parents when we're catching these products on these kids. And it's happening at remarkable rates. So again, I won't take up any more of your time unless you have specific questions for me, but I just felt it was important for you to hear that it is having an impact at the schools and that we're doing our best to try to keep all of your children, all of our children safe, and anything you can do to help us with that, we certainly would be very grateful.
Question?
Appreciate it. No.
Maybe a plug for Healthy Kid. Yes. And I absolutely. You looked at,
Well, I have one.
Sure.
And maybe this is for both of you.
Absolutely.
Do parents understand how much their students, their children are doing in this area?
I think they're beginning to. But again, 5-10 years ago, we weren't talking about this. This was not on our radar screen. There were plenty of substances that we were concerned about and we were having conversations about, but this has escalated so very quickly that I think many parents are just starting to kind of grasp that this is going on. And I think that that's why Dr. Lester has been in twice in the last year, is because parents are starting to ask us about this, and we know the problem, but we don't know the solutions necessarily. We just know that we're working on this. And so we're trying to bring in people like Dr. Lester to have those frank conversations with parents about what to be looking for. And I will share with you, thank you, Mr. Lewis, for reminding me, in the last year, we've had members of the community come together and form a coalition. So you may have heard out in the community, Healthy KP. It's a coalition of community members, business people, faith-based, law enforcement, people from the school department, all coming together and talking about how to keep our students safe. And we're talking about alcohol, we're talking about drugs, but we're also having some very significant conversations about the e-cigarettes and vaping. And that's the one that keeps rising to the top. So we're doing our best to try to get the word out to parents, and we're trying to get the community together to work on this, because we know it's too big for the schools to work on alone.
What are the rules and regulations within the high school when you catch students, or if you don't?
Well, again, catching is difficult, but I guess I would defer to Mr. Lewis to describe to you directly what they do.
Yeah, so I'd say that our handbook regulations are
Use the mic, please.
probably a little soft. Some schools have it as a suspension the first time your child gets caught. Currently at the high school, the first time your child gets caught with a vape, it's a Saturday detention, which can also have a little bit of an impact, but typically consequences, I find them not to be truly effective towards change. And a lot of the questions that we do get from parents is like, what can we do about it? That's why we had Dr. Lessman come in and speak to, come in and speak to the, come and speak to the community to try to educate them. We're going to be bringing in a program called Hidden in Plain Sight to the Norfolk DA's office, where they set up a bedroom and parents can look in and see what they can see and see where kids hide things and what have you. So, so the punishment is there, it's in the handbook, and we follow through on as much as we can. The second time they get caught, it's a suspension, which is typically an in-school suspension. You try to keep the kids in the school as much as you can. And then we also have worked towards offering up alternatives, which are methods like if you can get your child into a substance use class or a vaping cessation program or tobacco cessation program, we will hold off on the punishment as long as your child tries to go and make effective change in their lives. And we found that to be somewhat effective. Sometimes parents are okay with their children smoking. I know you probably don't want to hear this, but we have parents that smoke with their children. You know, so there's all different things going on that you have to manage. And at first, the parents were telling us that it seemed like it was our fault that this was happening. And so when we really started digging down and having conversations with them, we were trying to explain, like, this is coming through your household first and then coming into our school. So we just want to work together with you, and that's why we built the coalition, so we could start to try to attack this major problem. That first presentation that we did, when Jewel showed up with 3 people in suits, it really kind of took me back because I really wasn't prepared for it. It was just a message out to our community, just the 2 schools, and we had over 130 people show up, and Jewel showed up as well. I tried to disinvite them, but I wasn't successful. So I just felt like it was not appropriate. That curriculum that they have to do, my understanding of it, and if anybody knows differently, correct me, but I think that was a federal mandate that they had to create curriculum to try to educate it away from children. When they did change the law, another key feature is when they did change the law from being able to purchase at 18 up to 21, the thing to remember there is that if you've got an 18-year-old that can buy tobacco, they can also then come and sell it in the schools because they're still kids at that age. And so moving it up to 21 helped to separate that. And that's one of the main messages in that Jewel advertisement that you hear is that key feature of moving it up to 21. So.
How about programs for the kids in the school to educate them if they're hearing from their parents that it's okay, but they can make some decisions. They've made it about a lot of things in their life. So do you have any programs from them? I know that there are programs out there. Instead of a Saturday detention, could there be a program on Saturday?
So this past year, we had one of our assistant principals, Tracy Knapp, start a nicotine cessation program. And students that we were catching, we were offering up the opportunity for them to enroll in that program. And it was an 8-week session, and it's really around decision making and being able to have the skills to change the way that you make decisions. And we've had some success with that. Some students went through the program and didn't have success, but we're going to reevaluate every year and try to improve and make targeted efforts towards that. So that's one area that we've done it. We've done a lot of communication out with the parents and to the students as well. But we're open to any ideas that you might have, anybody in the community has, to try to work at it.
I think CDC actually has some programs
They
now
do, yeah, the CDC
that are
does.
for educators. So not just those kids that get caught.
And we
but
have
for
health
everybody.
education in our middle school. So our students
It's in our
go through health
curriculum.
education. They talk about all of those risky behaviors. And so part of that is effective when students hear why this is risky, but there's also a level of adolescence where, you know, it won't happen to me, it's, you know, it's somebody else's issue. Students are they're still developing. And so as much as we do classroom education with them, it's tricky. And so one of the ways to help with this is to make sure that they don't have access to it, so therefore they won't experiment and try it in the first place. Because we know that kids engage in risky behavior even when they know they shouldn't and it's wrong and there are, you know, reasons for not doing it. But we do have health education that we are working on that.
We also have consequences for athletes as well, just a kind of a side note. So if an athlete is caught vaping in the school, it's our obligation to uphold a suspension, which would be 25% of their athletic season. The reason why that's an important idea is because it didn't seem to stop a lot of kids. And a lot of students lost a lot of athletic eligibility due to it. And it was, they didn't think it was fair. It was very clear. We're very forthright about things. They know it. They sign documents before they start the season. And it just didn't seem to stop. And that was kind of an indicator of maybe the addiction that was going on. You can see facial changes in students who are using a lot. They turn white. They're very pale. You can see a noticeable difference. Their throats, their voices change a little bit when they're really using heavily. And then when you can have honest conversations with them afterwards, they really share a lot of information about what that experience has been like for them. And it's I really don't know another word other than addiction. So because that's what it looks like and feels like.
It's a weird question. Is there any issue with like nicotine gum or nicotine patches that you can?
That's a great question. I think that there are products out there right now that are not smoke or vape that have the same chemicals in them, and I believe my suspicion is that yes, they're using some of these things, because I'll see the same students who would typically be vaping in the bathroom, and they're in there and there's no vaping going on, and yet some of their behaviors are the same and some of their actions are the same. That's just speculation on my part and based on what I've seen over time. But
Could I comment about that for a second? First of all, there is something. Would you also mention, I remember, Kip, when you told me when I was there, how many hours a day you were spending enforcing the problems with Juul. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, it fluctuates. The last 4 weeks have actually been really nice. We haven't had a lot of students using the last 4 or 5 weeks, and it's been very nice. I do 3 to 4 bathroom checks a day because that's the only place that they have any privacy. And, you know, you just pop your head in and see. Sometimes they're just standing in a circle. And I'd say I'm probably at the beginning of the year, September through December, you're spending maybe 10%, 15% of your day. And that can be significant when you're trying to get in the classroom and watch teachers teach. And hopefully, you know, good instruction lowers behavioral problems. So the more we can work on instruction, the more we can get the other stuff to go away. But it used to be definitely significant, and it wavers.
I think it's also important to point out that in the last 4 or 5 weeks, our seniors have either had finals and then graduated as well. And so you've had a quarter of your students out of the building. Yes. Plus, as we saw, the behavior is increasing with age. And so when your seniors are out of the building, certainly that makes a difference and helps.
Yeah.
But yeah.
One more quick. I'm sorry, and I'll stop and sit down. But one kind of social dynamic that occurs is that the only place that they really have any privacy to do it is the bathroom, and so they'll go into the bathroom and they'll congregate there and they'll do it in a group. And other students come in just to use the bathroom for what it's there for, and they feel intimidated and they feel unsafe. So we actually get high volumes of calls from parents saying, my child doesn't feel safe using the bathroom. And so we use messages like that. And so I'll walk in and I'll just say, you know, you have to give other people privacy. No loitering, you have to get out. So I get my steps in, so. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the energy you're putting into this.
Thank you.
Really.
Please remember, mint is a huge part of this.
Yes.
Are there any other comments or questions or concerns? Yes.
Yeah.
Grab the phone.
Lawrence Wilson, I just wanted to point out a couple of things. Did anybody catch BUR, public radio, yesterday on a study that's being done by the FDA on vaping and the health effects of vaping? Just an excellent program yesterday, and they decided that what they found out so far, it's just vaping with nicotine, has the same sort of effect on the cardiovascular system as cigarettes. The next step of that study is to find out what component within that package is actually creating this problem. And what they're coming to, and they're starting to pinpoint, is nicotine. Seems to be the chemical that's creating cardiovascular issues. It's not cancer, it's not lung disease, it's cardiovascular. And so to sit there and say that gum containing nicotine is a good thing or alternative, it may not be. You know, I'd always believed, and being a ex-cigarette smoker, nicotine was fine. It was just the delivery system that had the problem as regards to combustible byproducts. It appears it's not. I'm shocked to hear what I just heard today, and I know the number of years I smoked. I have an addictive personality. I can imagine what these kids are going through with this package that's built to sit there and deliver this chemical and a strong boost right up front. And my tendency, I even thought about taking it up, but I quit altogether. I think we have punitive measures I just can't see working. You know, when you have a group that's this addicted, and you have a very strongly addicted group, so hopefully there's another mechanism for dealing with these kids, because they really do have a problem, and I don't think you're ever going to win with punitive measures.
Microphone. We'll just give you your own. How about that?
The European Union has banned the pod doses from the United States. The maximum in Britain for the EU is 20 milligrams per pod. In the United States, they say it's 59. An independent lab evaluated 69 milligrams per pods. So over 3 times, almost 3.5 times as much. And when you look at the studies that are coming from Britain, and you hear professors that talk about how wonderful this is, getting off nicotine and all that, well, the problem is when they've done the New England Journal that compared nicotine replacement therapy to e-cigarettes, they said, oh, e-cigarettes are twice as good at getting off tobacco cigarettes. Well, as this gentleman mentioned, what they fail to tell you is if you make the goal cigarettes and nicotine, 80% of people with e-cigarettes were still using at the end of the first year. Only 10% of the people with nicotine replacement therapy were still using nicotine replacement therapy. So it goes to your point. They got off nicotine too, which, as you say, may be cardiovascular problems. Two other problems we're finding: seizures. Some people in e-cigarettes get seizures now. The other is a subset who are getting what's called eosinophilic pneumonitis, which is an allergic reaction in the lungs. And there actually have been people who have been put on respirators as a result. Though it's a small number, and it won't take it off the shelves by the FDA by any means, it is still a concerning number about what damage it is doing. And the endothelial cells are really being damaged by a lot of these products, like antifreeze, propylene glycol, when it breaks down and heated formaldehyde and acetaldehyde. Chromium and nickel. If you want to take a look at my tacky car out front, Ms. Sullivan has already seen it. My wife won't drive in it with me. It's completely covered. My car's a star on Instagram right now, and I park it in front of my office, and everybody sees it when they come in. But I can't emphasize enough that this stuff is going to be extremely harmful, and we can't make our kids the lab rats of the future as our parents were. And if you notice, it has skipped a generation now. I ask kids at high schools, raise your hand, how many of you all have relatives that have died of tobacco-related diseases? Maybe less, maybe 5 to 10%. And I'm just in awe of that, because what success we had, but this is what we are losing now because these kids have no concept of history. Nicotine is not clean. It's not just like caffeine, and that's what we have to realize. Sorry. Thank you.
Any other comments? Yes, ma'am.
Hi. Hi, so my name's Mary Cole. I run the Greater Boston Tobacco-Free Community Partnership Program. I've been here to a couple past Board of Health meetings, so I'll be brief. The flavored tobacco restriction is important really because obviously there's an epidemic here, but it also helps control our environment and the tobacco and vaping industries. The tobacco and vaping industries are targeting kids. They're targeting them with flavors, and they're also with over 8,000 flavors. And they are targeting them in the retail environment itself. Actually, the tobacco industry spends 96% of their marketing money in these retail stores that are not age restricted, 96%. So that's done on purpose for exposure to kids. So this isn't just about access in stores that kids can see these flavored products. It's also about exposure and normalizing it. And from a public health lens, we really do need that education in the schools. We need education to parents. We also have to change our environment and change our retail environment and not normalize this stuff. So I'll just give that little plug for that is a big reason we support this. I mean, the tobacco and vaping industries like Juul, they're pulling PR stunts as well, even just like the Tobacco 21. It's like, can't beat them, join them, is what they're doing with that. We know from their initial marketing that they targeted kids with their advertisements of young, attractive people in bright colors. They also use influencers and young interns as well. That was their launch campaign. So something to be mindful of when we think about these companies as well. They have always been targeting kids and are looking for addiction. I will second menthol. It is a big push to also restrict menthol as well, something to really consider. There was a focus group done in Natick recently of youth who were caught vaping, and they said the most popular flavor was mint. And that really is what we're hearing, is mint is a popular flavor. So it kind of is a disservice if you are not also restricting mint. If you ask anyone, mint's a flavor, menthol is a flavor. We also know with menthol cigarettes, I know Dr. Hartman talked about it before, but they are likely more addictive, reduce the harshness of the tobacco as well, and also target young people and especially communities of color, the African American community. So it's really is an important factor to consider as well as just all the other flavors too. Yes, so thank you. I will leave it at that. And
Anyone else?
yes.
I have a question.
Wait.
I have a question. And this is for the superintendent. Having control of that population, studying the population of the high school, have you seen a decrease in SAT scores or absenteeism due to this epidemic?
I would say that we do not have that kind of correlational data. In fact, I would say in the bigger picture, we're very proud of our academic scores. And I would also say that our attendance rates are better than the state average. So no, I don't think that this is necessarily keeping them out of school for the day. And I don't necessarily think it has brought down their academic scores in a way that we can prove correlation-wise. But we know that these students are becoming so distracted by this that it's no longer waiting till the end of the school day. They're trying to find time during the school day. And so if they have to leave class to get to the bathroom so that they can vape, or if they're trying to wait for the teacher to turn away from the class to write on the whiteboard or to put a new slide up on the screen so that they can sneak a puff, then they're not concentrating on their studies. And so I think anecdotally we could say that, yes, it's a distraction to the education process. Do I have data? I do not, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Is there anybody who has been anxious to say something now said it? I think if that's the case, then we should move as a board to take some action.
Well, I would like
Would you like to say something, please?
Yeah. So, right now, the way that the regulations were publicized, they said that mint and menthol, under characterizing flavors, were exempt, other than the taste or aroma of tobacco, menthol, mint, or wintergreen. So I would like to make a motion that we remove other than the taste of the aroma of tobacco, menthol, mint, or wintergreen. And it,
Leave in the words other than the taste of tobacco. We would remove mint, menthol, and wintergreen and lower it down,
Okay.
I think 3 or 4 lines. It goes with the chocolate and all the other stuff.
so it would read, a distinguishable taste or aroma other than the taste or aroma of tobacco, imparted or detectable either prior to or during consumption of a tobacco product or component, part thereof, including but not limited to taste or aromas relating to any fruit, chocolate, vanilla, honey, candy, cocoa, dessert, alcoholic beverage, menthol, mint, wintergreen, herb, or spice. So we would
So
include
there's no
mint.
exemption.
There is no exemption for
Yeah.
mint, menthol, or wintergreen.
Now, the draft of this that was circulated did include the exemption.
That's
And
correct.
so what we're talking about now is taking that off the table. The green print is, you're looking at it
Right,
there.
right.
I am here too.
So,
Are you making a motion?
Well,
Yes,
this is,
I-
well, I
I
was
mean,
gonna
that-
say,
okay.
you're actually raising an interesting question, which is because this was circulated with the exemption in, do we need to do any additional circulation? Because the public hasn't commented on this proposal with that information in.
correct.
Rich McCarthy has a
Rich, you have a question or a thought?
Comment or-
Sorry, I was downstairs with the Conservation Commission. I would advise you to, if you want to take those two out, that you should republicize it and take it out so there's due notice to people, because you haven't, right now, the notice does not include that removal. And it's just more of a due process to do that.
Yeah.
So I think that goes beyond the scope of what you've published and advertised to take it out at this point.
Dr. Hartman?
Thank you. I agree with that, but I'm not the lawyer here who knows what I'm doing, but you are the tobacco control person, so you know this. Sorry about that. I didn't mean that way. But this gentleman. I also would offer towns are cap and winnowing permits at the same time, because there is fear that, okay, you've limited this to 21 smoke shops. There may be an influx of vape shops into your town as a result of this, because one vape shop, all you need is 1 or 2 high schools to fund your fund a vape shop. So basically, this is what's important to add to that is capping and winnowing your permits at the same time you do this. Westwood brought this up to me, and they haven't done anything yet. But this is what I believe Sharon did that as well, cap and window. Pretty much most of the people who did in these 11 towns capped and winnowed. I don't know all the legalistic terminology to that, and I'm not even going to even venture to give advice. But there is a distinct fear that you could end up with vape shops in your town as a result of this. That's why the cap and winnow. Do you want to say anything about it, or?
A couple things. The only hearings that you have to have are for Title V. So you didn't have to conduct a hearing tonight. You could have just done this at a regular Board of Health meeting. So you can do that vote, but I agree that you advertised it a certain way, and that in fairness to the retailers and the public, it would probably be a good idea to re-advertise that you're looking at that, and that might be a possibility. And Dr. Hartman's right, as far as capping the number of permits, any of your current convenience stores could change their business model and become an adult-only retail tobacco store. They'd have to get rid of the convenience store type food. They couldn't sell lottery. They couldn't sell gas, but they could sell all vape products. They could sell all tobacco products. They could sell all what we call smoking accessories for marijuana and other things. And so without capping the number of stores within the town, you could have a lot of adult-only retail tobacco stores coming in to try and get the business of the flavored tobacco products that you're now removing from the convenience stores. So you can do a couple things. You can cap and winnow, as Dr. Hartman refers to it. We call it retire. Cap and retire permits as they get turned in. You can also have instituted dual cap, where you could say X number of permits, and of which only X number could be adult-only retail tobacco stores. So you can have a cap within a cap.
I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Sharon did a zero cap on vape shops.
And I think, and I think Brookline kind of pretty much did the same thing.
So is that within the scope of this board to say that you can't have
Rich, are they?
vape shops,
Smoke shops
adult?
allowed by our zoning? Thought we had this discussion, and I thought that they were not allowed. We'd have to look into that.
Yeah.
Westwood is having some concerns about that now, because there's 2 vape shops have approached them to have vape shops there. So I'm not sure, because I don't know all the legal stuff, but you ought to find out about that, because I don't know if that's some kind of discrimination, there could be for a business to come in, things like that, so.
Well, we have this B1 zoning working committee, which now has a new member. I think that may be part of your agenda, because if we're looking at organizing businesses and restricting via zoning what businesses we allow, which is how it's typically done anyway, we would need to decide whether we have a law that says this can only happen at a, adult-only tobacco store, of which we shall have none. That sounds a little bit weird. So how do we actually put this law that we're talking about into action in such a way as it's not, impossible to ever sell such a device in the town ever again?
Yeah, I guess the only. No, it's a point to look at. The only difference is though, we're talking about zoning, and then we're talking about Board of Health regulations on the public health. So when you start to get into prohibition of uses through the zoning, that's a different bar. So I'm not sure about that. I would want to do a little homework before I come back to the board relative to that aspect of it. The point's taken though to look at it, but
Yeah.
I would have to see what those other towns are doing. This is really discussion relative to the Board of Health, I believe we're talking about, not from the
The
zoning.
regulation is a Board of Health regulation.
Yeah.
But the enforcement of the shops themselves, I think, moves beyond.
It does.
No?
The
Well,
permits come under the regulation.
Oh,
In
do-
order
Okay.
to have in order to sell tobacco products, you have to have a permit through the Board of Health, and it comes
Right.
under our regulations.
Correct, right.
We were contemplating the notion of actually zoning out a class of store here. Is kind of where
Yeah,
the
I'm not.
conversation was beginning to percolate.
Well, you can't zone out adult entertainment, so I'd be surprised. That might be protected. That's.
All right.
Let's get back on.
All right,
Let's
we're
not
back to Board of
stay
Health
on
permits
track on this.
So at
Back
this
at the moment.
We have to make a motion to resubmit a draft letter.
Yeah.
At least to
I
put,
think you should continue the public hearing till the next meeting.
well, but that's going, why can't we can do this in steps. We can at least get on the books that flavored tobacco products can no longer be sold in this town. And then we can work on how, if we have to modify the regulation a little bit more going forward, that says we won't have any adult-only stores.
This is not a prohibition. Be careful with the wording prohibition. This is not a ban. A person can go to another town and perfectly have the options to get it still. And the state is the one that's going to decide the prohibition.
Well, I meant the sale of of flavored
products. No,
products
I
in
agree,
the
but
town.
but when you hear from the tobacco people and the lawyer, who may ever get involved, who I debate every. This is the first time I haven't debated a lawyer in a meeting. First time at about 15 meetings I haven't debated a lawyer. Oh, you were here? They were here with Fletcher and Tilton. So they kept using the word ban or prohibit, but it's restrict. So.
And I believe that the town, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe 2 years ago, did vote to not allow marijuana dispensaries in town or selling marijuana, but you can go over to Brookline and get it, FYI. Franklin, really? Okay. No kids are listening.
I guess my suggestion from a board perspective, and forgive me if I'm overstepping here, but you had a hearing this evening for this particular issue. I think you certainly are well within your rights to go forward with this evening, and now what you have is a group of people who have asked you to consider taking it even further. So once you have this decision done tonight, then you can come back again and talk about amending the language that you approved this evening to include the mint piece of it. But I'd hate to see you lose the momentum this evening where you've had this conversation and it feels like you feel passionately about it, where you're willing to put forth an even amended proposal. So I guess my suggestion from a board perspective would be to vote on it as you presented it this evening, and then to move forward with an amendment at your next meetings where you could then advertise it appropriately as you would like, and hopefully move forward a second time and ban the mint part of it as well.
And the cap and winnow part is the other thing that's part of this. The other option is to do the mint and menthol tonight and then discuss the cap and winnow. That's more palatable to me, because I think this decision around mint and menthol should be decided, because I was surprised because what the trend is in the state right now, and you have towns, Walpole and Sharon here, and Medfield is considering, Millis is considering as well doing this. Plainville, I've talked with. I've also talked with Mansfield, who's considering as well. They didn't, Rentham did not do mint and menthol. Not mint and menthol, they did not, but they did do restrict all other flavors. But again, I'll be back here again, because the problem with mint is it's a real problem. I'd hate for this not to go into effect before next school year, you know, because I really think that's what's important here.
I think most of us are on board about banning the extra flavors. I think it's just a matter of protocol in terms of getting the letter back out to the public for their approval, and then having a second public hearing to make sure that there aren't people who are jumping up and down about menthol and wintergreen. So yes, is that the feeling here?
Yeah, I think I have a little bit of a reservation over giving basically the impression that we put this out for conversation, and now we are going to say, okay, we've had the conversation, now we're going to vote, and oh, by the way, there's more coming. I would kind of like to do this all at once. I think it's just a little cleaner if we could do it in July rather than in June, and it still gets done before the beginning of the school year.
I think
we've accomplished what we needed to accomplish.
I think that's great, but the industry is morphing so rapidly. Towns, boards of health need to morph quicker. That's what's happening in this area. Lord knows there's a nicotine toothpick now called the Nick Pick. That's coming out. We haven't regulated that, but that will be in your town, okay? I already have heard about these things, okay? And so you have to be really careful. People are trying to get around laws about nicotine e-juice by giving them the water and the flavorant, and the person mixes them. They're trying to do that in San Francisco now. I called a few vape shops there. But I ask you to don't delay certain parts of this. Keep moving and keep being willing to change articles. Don't wait another year. Take 2 or 3 months and do this, because
I was talking a few days. I wasn't talking another year.
All right, all right. Next month, do it.
I applaud everyone's passion about this, and I think you all know where I stand on it. But I have to tell you, I do think it is important that I always consider other people's sides, that I do think a month of public notice and letting people who might have a vested interest give their public opinion, or people who are fully in support of it give their opinion as well, so you can see where the town lies, which I know pretty much where it does. But I think for a vested interest in other people's, I think, and also from a law perspective too, I'm not a lawyer, but making sure that you cross your T's and dot your I's so that no one in the future can come back and sue the town. That's just my opinion.
I tell you what, I'm going to have the board take a vote right now. I'm going to call for a vote on whether we wish to, in fact, take a vote on what's already been published. And if we decide to take a vote, we'll take a vote. And if we decide to delay until we have a new version of this to vote into effect in another month, we'll do that. So may I call for a motion?
Can I just get some clarification? So
Okay.
if we take a vote, does that mean effective tonight? What does it mean? That retail stores, the sale of flavored tobacco products except mint, menthol, and wintergreen will be restricted as of tonight? How does that work?
You wouldn't want to make it effective tonight.
Okay.
That's not fair to the retailers.
Okay,
They need time to sell down the product that they have in their store, not order new product. We need time to work with the health department to get information out to your retailers so that they understand what you've done. So there's a process.
So what are we talking about, like 6 weeks?
No, a lot of communities have done 30 days,
30 days,
60
okay.
days at the most.
So we would make, we could make this effective a month from now with the exemption of mint, menthol, and wintergreen, and then come back in July if, after we've published new regs, and say that that would be if, depending upon how we vote in July.
All right, so yeah, the effective date isn't on here anywhere, I don't think. We haven't talked about effective dates, so about a month.
Say August 1st.
I was thinking August 1st would be a logical time for something which is being acted on right now. And then we would have another cycle if we decide to do this, maybe with a September 1st deadline for the no mental moment.
Before the school year starts.
Again, before the school year starts.
Okay, if we could do that.
So back to the
Reasonable.
original question. Do we want to do this basically piecemeal, or do what's already been published tonight and do the rest of it the next time? Is there a motion to go one way or the
I
other?
make a motion that we do it
Just
in
do it.
pieces, because I don't want to lose that momentum. And with the exemptions in the regs, and effective date would be August 1st.
I
Is there a
second the
second?
motion.
Further discussion? Nah. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
All right, I'll abstain. 2-0. So we are going to do it tonight. So is there a
Then-
motion to approve the, that was to move ahead with this?
This regulation, as it
Okay,
is.
we've now decided to, was that actually a motion to approve this? Or is it a motion to decide whether we're going to do this piecemeal? This was a piecemeal question, right? As was originally proposed?
Robert's rules.
I think it was a piecemeal. Okay, now before us is this proposal as it was published. Is there a motion to approve this proposal as it was published?
I thought that's what we just did.
I'm saying what we just did was decide whether or not we were going to consider it tonight, as opposed to doing it all at once later. And the vote
Okay.
was to consider it tonight.
Tonight.
Now we're considering it. So, is there a motion to approve?
I make a motion that we approve the regulations as they were printed in the public newspapers.
Effective August 1st.
August 1st.
I presume there's a second.
Second the motion.
Further discussion? Now, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
All right. So this is going into effect as of August 1st with continuation of the additional menthol and.
Could you make a motion on that you will discuss
Yes.
further the mint and menthol issue at your next Board of Health meeting?
Well, we can set our own agenda. I mean, that's we control. So, but we do need to take a vote on proposing this change for submission for consideration,
Public,
for public consideration. We do need to do that.
yes. So I make a motion that we now restrict the sale of,
How about just remove the
characterizing the
words?
flavor
Yeah.
as a distinguishable taste or aroma other than the taste or aroma of tobacco. That's it. And menthol and mint and wintergreen are not in there.
And I would urge you to put the cap and winnow, because if you don't do the cap and winnow, you're gonna have vape shops coming here. I can guarantee you that.
Well, I think we need to get some, I feel like we need to get some direction.
We need at least a draft of what to look at when you
Yeah.
talk about cap and winnow.
It was in the original regulations that you got.
I don't think so.
Really?
No, I don't think so.
Can you resend those to me? The original, I may have them, but.
We never finished that.
So
portion.
I can send the language to Betsy again. I suggest that you put it through town council, have them look
We
at
will
it.
need to do that separate, because there's no cap and winnow, or the word cap only appears once in the word capable. So it's not in what we sent out for
It's
comment.
It was in the tobacco sales permit section,
It's called
and
something else then.
maybe I knew ahead of time that you weren't interested in it and didn't put it in. I don't know. Let me see. Yeah, I don't know why it's not in there.
Okay.
And I don't know whether that was as a result of conversations that I had had with Fran or with Betsy, or Somehow I just
Tell you what, it is on the table, but we just don't have anything to work with right this second,
And
so
I can
let's try
send
to
that to
find something.
Betsy.
All right, well, we'll work on that as soon as we can. All right, so we have accomplished some things tonight, and there's more to happen, I'd say, in the next month or so.
So did we finish that conversation?
We're
Are we
done.
going
What do you wanna
to
do?
go out for comment, the new regulations?
Right.
We didn't,
So we have the proposal to send out for comment and public review what we've just done, excluding the words essentially other than the taste or aroma of tobacco, menthol, mint, or wintergreen.
well,
Those words will no longer be in there.
no, other than,
The
the aroma of
taste of
tobacco will be in
tobacco.
there.
It would stop there. Everything else would be excluded. Has to
Yeah,
taste
why
like
is the
The
tobacco
green-
here twice?
The green has to be out.
Yeah, that's what, I just read it.
Mm.
It's got tobacco in there.
Because it's
Is that
supposed to,
just
it
a
has
misprint?
to taste like tobacco.
Yeah.
There isn't much else it can taste like.
Right,
So they'll be taken out of line 1 and 2 on characterizing flavor
yep.
and moved down
Into,
anywhere you want into that line that talks about candy, cocoa, dessert, alcoholic beverages in characterizing flavor. So it just gets moved down a few lines.
Well, menthol, mint, and wintergreen are already in that candy and cocoa set of law.
No, they will be though. So we're
Well,
gonna.
they are now.
no,
Right
they're
there.
not.
What, they get taken out? They're right
They
here.
got
So it's at the
taken
top
out.
here, other
That-
than,
That's the original
yeah.
one that we looked
The
at.
last
That's
time
not
you
the
met,
one that went
you
out.
decided you wanted to leave them where they were.
Yeah.
And
An older version?
I think maybe on your original draft, they were in both places to show you what your options were.
And they got taken
So
out
we
down
pulled
here.
them out of the lower spot because you wanted to leave in the exemption.
Right.
All right,
now-
we'll take care of the,
Yep.
So it's gonna
The
end
editorial.
up just tasting like tobacco. We're gonna take menthol, mint, and wintergreen and put it down under here.
So,
Yep.
you see what I've got here?
so we're going to do that. Now, is that the only time we make that change?
Yeah.
Okay.
And can I just make sure that you three understand that that means when you remove the exemption, that it would then move Salem's, Newport's combustibles to adult-only stores? I just want to make sure you
Well, that's
You
where the
understand.
pushback is coming from in the first place. That's a big chunk of cigarette sales, I'm assuming.
It is. It is. It's also a big chunk of potential nicotine addiction and tobacco-related illnesses.
Mm-hmm. Understood. Right?
Yes,
Well,
absolutely.
People get a chance to come in and comment.
All right,
That's why we
all
sent
right.
it out
So
there.
that's our intention for the next bit.
Okay.
When's the next meeting?
We got to decide that too. We will let everybody know. It'll be sometime in July.
I think it's
It's like July 16th.
Did we already vote for that?
No,
We
there's
said
a-
the
on
third.
It's looking like it might be July 16th.
We talked about the third Tuesday of the month
Yep.
to be consistent.
All right, I think we have accomplished a lot. We have some other things we have to accomplish tonight. So, thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Your good advice and counsel.
Thank you.
It has been very useful.
Thank you, thank you. Okay.
All right, then, we are done this topic for now. Did I give this stuff back?
Oh, no, I think that's ours. From the kitchen table.
Okay. Where's the agenda?
Here's a- there you go one. Yeah, that's why she gives it to us in orange. That's really helpful.
Good thinking.
Yeah.
Folks from Lawrence Street, you still here? They are tenacious. Sorry for the delay. If you thought we're going to have this conversation at 7:30, we're a little bit behind. but I hope you understand why we did what we did. In fact, I hope you support us. Thank you very much, Mr. Superintendent, for stopping by.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very much appreciated.
Thank you. Oh, children. Children. Thank you, Dr. Hartman. Thank you.
So, is Paul here? Hey, man. Come on down. Richard, do you want to begin with an update, or how shall we proceed here? There are some things we need to share.
I think as far as update goes, we're here, as you know, trying to go back in time, think about when the last time we were here. I think it was a month ago or April, I think. I think anything happened in May. The Abbeville comprehensive permit was continued to tomorrow evening. And from what I understand, I believe, well, I don't know tomorrow night, but so one of the questions related to the 40B project was site eligibility relative to part of the property, proposed development site. The ZBA had reached out to Mass Housing to get an opinion of whether relative to site eligibility. The site eligibility they have for part of the development site, but not the Buckley Mann property. And understand, I don't think we have anything officially in writing, but I believe they have gotten some correspondence, at least verbally. I don't, but I'm trying to remember tomorrow. I haven't seen the agenda for tomorrow night yet. But at the same time, relative to the PIP process, it's kind of, as you well, some know, and maybe not know, it's kind of come to a halt. So we're here to kind of update, fill in the gaps. And I'm going to really turn it over to Paul to kind of fill in a lot of the gaps and kind of where we're at. And I'll supplement it, but he's kind of the man relative to, or the person, sorry, but to kind of fill in the gaps where you were. And now just this Q&A, I think that's just the general purpose of tonight. I know the public wants to be able to speak to the Board of Health, and we'll have a dialogue on and go back and forth where we're at. And then we'll go from there. It's not a great update, but I don't really have a great update per se.
Well, there's to be continued. We have more update to come.
Sure, I can jump in there. Yeah, sure. So from the regulatory perspective, under the Massachusetts Contingency Plan, I think the last time I spoke publicly, we had PCB data that we had obtained from splitting samples. We had talked about that likely being a new reportable condition. We had that data sort of mid-January. And once that data is given to the responsible party, who in this case would be the Buckley Mann family, the owners of the property, then they would have very likely an obligation to report. As you know, that sort of process has played out a little bit. A lot of the folks in this room here are largely responsible for maybe, prodding the process along a little bit. And with communications from DEP, it seems like some information came out about the timing when that data was actually given to the responsible party. It seemed like they had indicated in correspondence it was the end of January 29th. And the reporting, they're classifying as a 120-day reporting condition, and they reported the presence of PCBs and a few other contaminants. It was zinc and some petroleum constituents, carbon ranges. These are new contaminants, or I guess they're classifying them as new contaminants that are identified on the site, contaminants of concerns. And they reported those with a revised release notification to DEP on May 29th. So they didn't get a new release tracking number. It's tacked on to the old release tracking number, the case ID for the site. So the person that was conducting the response actions before, they had engaged Mabbitt Associates as LSP representative to continue on. I know they certainly were engaged in the PIP process, and they had a phase 2 scope of work they were conducting it. So they were doing sampling, soil and groundwater, and they were doing that on behalf of the potential developer, and they were collecting that data. And as Richard indicated, they no longer are licensed site professional of record. They discontinued those response actions. So right now it would fall back to the responsible party, but it sounds like the responsible party is seeking financial inability. So with that, if they, with that process, they would file an application and basically indicate that they're not able to continue on with the response actions, the assessment and remediation, if necessary, of the site. And if they're successful and DEP agrees with their application that they don't have the financial means to proceed, then the response actions would basically be in a limbo. So I think that's the status. I don't know if maybe stop it there and maybe take questions, or if there are any questions from the board. Yeah.
So if the owner, the property, can't financially clean up the property, just based on history, who ends up cleaning up the property? Or does it stay the way that it is?
It essentially, I mean, my understanding of financial inability is it stays that way until something changes. So the question has come up if a sale goes through, whether it be for its, the use that's in front of the ZBA now or some other use, then, presumably that would be a financial transaction, and the means would be available either by the person coming in, or with the sale, then the Mann family would now have the proceeds to proceed with the cleanup. But with financial inability, my understanding is that the response actions aren't conducted, are basically ceased until something changes with the financial equation. That's my understanding. I'm not an attorney, and again, I'm the technical person who enacts the cleanup. And as far as the financial inability, my understanding again is it effectively suspends the response actions, the timelines. Response actions again meaning the assessment and if necessary cleanup, and the timelines are suspended that are typically enacted through the regulatory process.
So that the contaminated property is not in a Zone 2 aquifer. I thought it was in a Franklin Zone 2 aquifer.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's classified as a GW1 area, and so there are potential receptors that would need to be evaluated as part of the assessment, and that's what was being conducted but is now being suspended.
So has anyone tested their water? Franklin, we don't know if they've tested their water for PCBs to see if any of those things have, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any testing being conducted on those receptors.
Has the town of Franklin been notified?
Not to my knowledge.
I do know that the town of Franklin, in particular, the DPW director, had been to previous public hearings when this, earlier on when we had discussions relative to this. I recall, I think one of the sessions was at the Freeman Kennedy School, and they were there. So I would, and actually, by way of on a more closer level, the DPW director for the town of Franklin was a previous candidate for the town administrator position here for the town, and I do know that there was discussion about that particular point. So I think, there is knowledge. There's I don't know off the top of my head if Franklin has tested the water though, but they are aware of the situation. It's not a new situation.
And this is, just to elaborate that, this is a discussion that we have had. Are there receptors, either ecological or human populations that could potentially be affected? And again, that's an evaluation that would typically be done by the person who's responsible for the release, the Mann family.
I think the one I know for your benefit, because you probably hadn't been here before, for everyone's benefit and the public, and I think some have learned and more about this program in general, but, and Paul obviously is a licensed site professional, can talk about it, the points, but the program is a privatized system to take contaminated sites that are under the supervision of a licensed site professional and get them cleaned up. And the DEP has audit responsibilities oversighting it. But the program is based on development, the money that's associated with development to clean up dirty sites. That's the, so as we've had discussions in the past, the challenge is that in a lot of cases, dirty sites, a more urbanized area, and the development scenarios and options to be able to clean up a site are a little bit larger perhaps than other sites, particularly in our case. You know, we're talking about a site that's in a low density residential neighborhood where the zoning is low density residential. So what makes it compounds the situation on a larger macro level. And the cleanup goes to the responsible party. The responsible party is the Mann family. Now they're apply for this financial inability, and we do have the Southwood property on the other side of town, which is another site, which is, I know it's a while ago, so I think some of the regulations and the terms have changed, but essentially in the same situation, that the contamination that's on that site with the medical waste that's there, there's oil that's there, the buildings themselves, they applied for and they received this financial inability, and because the cost to clean up exceeds the money that they have. So they have that in place there, and there's been a previous attempt a few years ago to do some zoning with a developer to come up with a development proposal that would clean up the site. More recently, we had another developer who came forward, was working with the Archdiocese to try to develop that property and clean it up, and they walked away from it. So again, that's another situation where we have in our own community where we're kind of a precarious situation where you have contaminated sites that do need to be cleaned up. You need to have some way to get it done, and the responsible party, potentially if they get this financial inability, puts us in a tough spot overall. And we're trying to, and one of the things that we're trying to figure is there's a roadmap to try to work to come to, because part of the program is, and particularly related to the grant, I know people asked about grants, and some of the grant money isn't eligible for contamination on private property. If it's a public entity that has it, that's a different situation. And some of that money is available for assessment. So there's not a kind of the sphere of opportunities to clean up is as big as we think, because which makes it more challenging. So, you know, it becomes a more competitive process. So it makes it harder. And meanwhile, we're sitting there with a contaminated site. So it's not good news for the town. It's not good news for the neighborhood. And we're trying to, and I know the neighbors are concerned, and I totally appreciate their concerns. I'm concerned that, you know, and I know people are very concerned about that development as very impactful, but, and I get that, and I appreciate that, but I'm also concerned in a long-term situation where the property owner just gets this financial inability, and to find somebody else, to find a pathway out to clean this up isn't there, and we're stuck. And that's a big concern. And so trying to balance this off is getting more challenging. I know I'm kind of going a little bit off here, but you know, the law is the law, the program is the program, and and our expectations don't match in a way, and it's not a good thing because there's mechanisms for people to hold off the cleanup and and avoid responsibility, and in part we're here because of work that was inadequate years ago to that level, and that's partly why we're sitting here today. So it's very frustrated, I guess I would say, and disappointed of the poor work that was done years ago, and now we're sitting here today trying to clean something up, and we're in a tough spot. I think I've said enough for the moment. I'll let others speak, but
yeah, I just want to ask one thing. Facetious statement is the PCBs. Do they understand they're in limbo, or is that stuff moving downstream? I think there's an overarching concern with all this, which is people drink that water coming out of that eventually, both in Franklin and potentially us, and it has an impact on our aquifer. It's just a simple statement besides the neighborhood. The other thing is, what happens when somebody doesn't pay their taxes with their property? What happens? I don't know. You don't pay your taxes, does the town take your property and?
They go through a foreclosure process, and then the town, would affect you unless they redeem and pay for it.
Isn't this much the same thing?
No, they're paying their taxes, but yeah.
But they're not dealing with their responsibilities vis-a-vis the property, which taxes is one component. This is another component.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that statement. Certainly, obviously, they're not taking care of their responsibilities, but the taxes are separate. The state. I mean, you can.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to. I mean, again, the financial inability is a mechanism or an avenue in the regulations that they're seeking, and they're going to put forth an application, and DEP will review the application and either approve or disapprove it. And if they disapprove, deny the application, then they'll be compelled to move forward with the response action. And again, I use that term as a MCP term, or to involve sort of assessment and cleanup if necessary. So they'll compel them to move forward. But if they deem that the application has merit, and then they give them the financial inability status, then again, that's within the framework of the regulations, and DEP will issue that status, and again, it effectively suspends the moving forward with the assessment and cleanup. So again, as Rich pointed out, not great news, that for folks that are looking to clean up the site, but that's they're operating within the framework of the regulations.
Let me ask one question, and then others can too, as well. We're talking about a program that's designed for basically privately held land to get cleaned up, principally as the result of there being some change in the economic status of the folk involved. Like, for example, development is coming along and there's money on the table, and now things can get cleaned up. But what if there is no money on the table? There are other programs, are there not? I'm thinking of brownfield situations.
Yeah, I think Rich was alluding to that, and just to sort of clarify, like it's development and sort of the money changing hands is oftentimes a catalyst for the cleanup. Like, and even in this situation, a lot of the initial cleanup in the identification of PCBs was driven by the proposed development, and that's often the case. I mean, oftentimes people don't go look unless there's a property transfer or proposed development. Unless the site conditions are changing, oftentimes there isn't the investigation. But oftentimes, there are other releases. auto accident or something on the highway and it releases, oil, there's a situation where, again, the responsible party is required to clean it up. Here, I think they're looking in that the party is saying they don't have the financial means to do the cleanup, and in the regulations, they I guess deem that if there's merit there, they're not going to compel folks to put forth with the cleanup if they don't have the financial means to do so. So I think that's maybe a little clarification there that oftentimes development is the driver, but it's not necessarily the requirement.
Right, so when it's not the driver, then what happens? And then the question becomes, are there other programs that?
Yeah, yep, so that was the second, and so there was, as Rich alluded to, like, brownfields, but oftentimes if the town was gonna, put forth a brownfield grant, they would need to have control of the property. And so, if the town was gonna acquire the property, then there's certainly, liability considerations and, and now you're going down a whole nother avenue. There are some EPA grants and other things that can be looked at. But again, as sort of pointing out that oftentimes it's the private entities looking to, develop or there's some catalyst there on the private side is oftentimes what the driver is for a cleanup. So.
Should we be talking to our state rep about something happening at the state level?
And from the state level, such as cleanup or compelling a cleanup or looking for funding or
property and making it state land so the cleanup can occur.
Yeah, I mean, again, I can't speak to. I would.
Well, let's come back to this issue though of where could the money come from? Now, do you want to add to this conversation?
I do.
Yeah,
I don't know where the money can come from. But first I wanted to say, did you say that they had a okay from Mass Housing to develop only the LaRusso land? Is that what you said in the beginning?
No, I said they have, they're seeking a letter for a clarification about that.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So I did have a question about, so the money that the financial inability, they have to show they don't have that money. Is that for the next response action, which is to finish the phase 2 scope of work? And how much is left? Because Mabit did quite a bit already. Yeah. So it's just, there are some significant data gaps, and I do have a little handout. So there is one area that wasn't tested, and that's the river. 3 points on the river. You're probably, you know that where they are. He knows where they are. Yeah. So 3 points on the river was water and it was sediment, and those were not tested. And so, before they get financial inability, I would hope that we could go to the DEP and compel them to at least finish those tests and the data gaps that maybe you also noted, could be important.
So maybe on that note, I mean, I think, Rich and I certainly had a conversation. I know Rich had a couple conversations with DP. I know you did as well. And certainly our hope was that they, this financial inability avenue, and there was an option that DEP could have compelled them to do more. It doesn't seem like from our conversation that's happening. So again, the financial inability is an application that's out there, and again, DEP has an opportunity to review that and approve or deny it. And if they deny it, then they're going to have to, somebody's going to have to push forward with assessing and evaluating if there's a risk on the property and risk to humans, ecological, river sediment. All of those will need to be assessed, and that was one of the deficiencies in the original piece of work. But as it stands now, it doesn't sound like DEP is compelling them to do more work, such as like an imminent hazard evaluation or some of these other, things that, are a potential concern.
Right. So on that drawing, we have a 500-foot radius shown, and that's an area that wasn't tested. Now, if anything comes up in those areas, that's 500 feet, and there are several homes that are within that 500 feet, then it would be an imminent hazard. Then they would at least have to gate it off and post it before they stop doing response actions, which leads me to my next concern is, what can the Board of Health do to protect the unsuspecting public who goes there? They're fishing there. Kids have been trying to get into the site for its vacation time. They use their recreational vehicles. It's not posted. It's not gated off. And I know it's private property, but people still fish there. We have that beautiful new bridge, and there should be at least a sign that says catch and release only, or go with the state has a ban on fishing for pregnant women. You could at least post that sign. I think it says pregnant women, women who may become pregnant, and children should not eat fish from a fresh body of water in the state of Massachusetts. So you can at least put that sign up. So there are things that I think the Board of Health can do to protect the unsuspecting public, because you know what's over there. And I'm wondering if there's anything you could do.
What is the 500-foot radius around a site that we know has contamination requires notification, correct?
So the 500-foot into the regulations, so if it's particularly soil, or if it's in a drinking water resource area, will make it more restrictive on the standards that you apply. So, for instance, if we were in 500 feet of a residence, that would make it a residentially zoned property. That would make it the more stringent soil category that you would compare data to. And if those concentrations were at a level where there could be exposure, that's where it ratchets it up. So by exposure, typically they define it at there's elevated levels, and they define those in the regulations in the top 1 foot. And within 500 feet, or of a residentially zoned property, the thought is there that you could have receptors such as children, what have you, coming in contact with that soil, and it could be deemed an imminent hazard. So I think that's what Sandy's getting at, and that could be a condition that's present on the site. I know there's, looking at the record, there's conflicting opinions there. There's information that's up there. And again, the hope was that, DEP might take it the next step and at least maybe get it over that hurdle and see if there was an imminent hazard, but that doesn't appear to be the case as of yet. So
Right.
Again, the financial ability is it seems to me that's where we're sort of at the, we're at the financial ability stage, and once that determination is made, we'll know whether they're going to proceed forward with more response actions, or if financial inability is approved, then the response actions may not continue.
Right. So they do have that in the tables that I gave you. It's about 310, I think, is parts per million is the maximum PCB level right now, which when I spoke to them at DEP, they said that if you get it up to 400, then you may have an imminent hazard. So we're very close. These are just the original data points. They didn't find the maximum yet. They didn't characterize the site and the nature and extent of the whole PCB contamination issue. So these are just the initial data points, and I don't think it's possible that they found the maximum on the first go-round. It's just statistically probably not possible. So the other question I did have was, has the town looked at downgrading and property status? You can go down and test your property, which is downstream. And will you have Paul go do that?
Our property? What do you mean?
Yeah. There is a monitoring well downstream, and you own property along the Mill River?
Ah.
The town does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And downgrading property status is if you have sort of a contaminated property, and if that contamination migrates onto somebody else's property, then that's a regulatory vehicle that's used to say, hey, they're contaminating my property, it's not our contamination, they should clean it up on their property, and you basically, put the onus on them to expand the area of their contamination and address the contamination that's on your property. So in order to ascertain downgrading property status, you would have to identify that there's contamination on your property. You would report it to the state. You would do enough investigation and assessment to determine that it's not, the town's contamination. It's originating from upgradient. And once, if that's true and appropriate, and you can validate that with the data that you collect, then you can ascertain downgrading and property status. So that would involve, to sort of, to Sandy's question, like assessing. And unfortunately, right now, the way, ideally, the folks who have a known release, they're operating under this open release tracking number. Under the regulations, they would define the full nature and extent of contamination in soil, groundwater, horizontally, vertically, look at that extent of contamination, evaluate the risk, and if it does pose a risk, then typically you would mitigate it in some way, shape, or form. And unfortunately, we're at that juncture that if denied, then they will be doing that assessment. It's required under the regulation to determine how far that contamination may migrate. If financial inability is approved, then that assessment may not be conducted in the near term by the Mann family.
Rich, do you want to say something about possible source of data on, in fact, what is going downstream? Because we're talking about the well site, and there's been testing done.
Yeah, so
Well,
I've spoken to the DPW, and they did, because they actually went out on this property to investigate for a possible water supply for the town of Norfolk as a well site. I've asked the DPW director to get it to us, but so it should be forthcoming. But at least from the conversations with the environmental partners that did the testing, which was a pump test, and they do a drawdown onto the well field to see if the aquifer can recharge over a period of time. They did not find any water quality issues doing those pump tests that were done. What they had issues was the aquifer being able to recharge. So I've asked them to provide that data to us to see. So the testing that they did would be to establish a public drinking water supply. So similar to what we just did with Holbrook Street. So in the interim, I suppose I can get the Holbrook Street stuff. If I can't get quickly what they did on the Buckley Mann property, but I will get it to the Board of Health to take a look at it. And they are, and as we go along, the DEP adds contaminants that are emerging contaminants that they're requiring communities to test for. And I know right now with the Holbrook Street well, there's emerging contaminants, and whether or not we need to test for them that are much, much lower levels than not related to what we're talking about here. But so, but just through a phone conversation, they didn't see anything in their pumping results from a water quality standpoint.
But we don't know what they tested for.
Correct.
So you're going to get that information?
I will get it,
At
yes.
least from Holbrook Street?
No,
from this
Okay.
from this
from the river.
Proposed site.
Okay.
Yeah, we give them-
Not. They're on the Buckley Mann property somewhere. I don't know exactly the pinpoint where it is, but I've asked DPW to get that to me, so I'll ask them to
So
step
that
it up.
answers Sandy's question. I mean, we need to start, I mean, she's asking us to do more testing. We should at least
Mhm.
see these results before we do more.
Right.
There's another well. No, that was a test well, but there is another monitoring well, I believe, on town property.
There is another well. Yeah. But from my understanding, it might, if it's, we could talk to DPW, it might be worth to the company, Environmental Partners, to go through and just explain. They have before at Board of Selectmen's meeting, just the process they go by to test for new public water supply, the pump test, the drawdown, to get, it's a pretty extensive test, and there's pumping that is done over multiple days, so it's not just, I'm not going to say we haven't seen the results, but it might be fairly substantial information to take a look at could have more value than looking at the other well that's on the town property. I think the one thing we did want to circle back was if we did testing on, or the downgraded property status, would, they're in this, if they've applied for financial inability and they're, say hypothetically, we test it and it comes back dirty, and what does it do to the site who's, so they're the contributor, they don't have money to clean it up, so what do we find?
Yeah,
Where
no,
do we
and-
get from there?
And that's the unfortunate situation is that if the downgrading property status was a valid situation where the contamination was originating on the man property and migrating onto the town's property, I mean there's not much to do unless you can treat the source of the contamination. And
Right.
so if financial inability again is approved by DEP, then yeah, you're right. We're back into this situation where it may not improve.
So it gets back, yeah, it gets back to my earlier point. We can, and I appreciate doing the testing, but we know there's contamination there, and we haven't had the full extent of it, and we need to let people know. But if we can't get the property cleaned up, where are we?
But if it's affecting the public drinking water, it's a whole other ballgame.
I agree, but if
So
they-
then we're gonna have to think bigger. I don't know how, but we'll have to.
That's my, I mean,
I hear you. It sounds like a catch-22 right now, but we can't let it affect the public drinking water.
yeah.
We'll have
Well,
to do
well,
something.
But then again, we're all here because there is a proposal on the table. And the proposal is being produced by somebody who's got fairly deep pockets and has a lot of money at stake in this project of his. So we keep maybe ignoring the fact that there is a potential for development which would remediate even the PCB problem. So, yeah, right now, today, we have some issues, but I guess the question I think we need to discuss is it in the best interest of the town to work with this developer to essentially clean up a potentially significant environmental problem?
Right.
And do it in a way that is in the best interest of the town. And yeah, by the way, he's gonna make some money too. He's gonna make money, he's gonna make a lot of money. But do it in a way that's responsible, that in a way is at least acceptable to the neighborhood. That's, I think, a conversation we need to have.
I agree. I think that, and I always come back to this, which is hard, and I understand from the neighbor's standpoint, there's a large development. But this development is a residential development. So it's a concern for the existing residents that are there. And if somebody wants to invest a significant amount of money to do a residential development, he's got to convince new people to buy homes. So it would seem to be that logic would speak, those two things are aligned. So to clean up the area for the existing residents and try to convince somebody that it's clean and I want to invest and buy a new house in an area which is highly publicized. It's not an unknown thing that people can Google and see that it's a contaminated site. That is in his best interest to do as best he can, because the financial stakes are very high for that person as well. So it seems like those things are somewhat, to a degree, aligned. And I guess that's, and I understand, and I'm not, I want to be clear that I think, and we're not saying, we're not, it's a large residential development. And it's much denser than the underlying zoning of the area. But I think we're also looking at, when you start to add up the cost to potentially clean that property up, that it's a very high number. And to make it work financially, it has to be a lot denser than the town is allowing right now on the underlying zoning. And that's the in-between.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but did I hear also that they were talking about cutting off that segment of the land from Abbeville that's polluted and not having that be part of Abbeville and go over and build on the area that's uncontaminated. Have I heard it, that that's potentially an option?
They are considering taking and developing a portion of the property, which is the Little Russo property, and then abandoning the Buckley Man property.
Right.
And if they do that, the Buckley Man contaminated property remains as is.
Exactly.
Unless
I-
we
I
find
don't
somebody
see-
else.
I don't see the hook here that ties him into cleaning up this property.
He has, we'll take it for what, he's presented a 40B development which included both pieces of property, okay? The purchase and sales that was there, it's lapsed, he's trying to bring it back in full. And I understand, and I'm not gonna say you don't trust him, and I get that, but at the same time, it's a value, it's a kind of a decision-making tree. If he moves away from it and goes to the Russo property and we're remained with a contaminated Buckley Man site, and these folks find a file for an financial inability, where are we? You know, we still,
My point
he's,
to you
he's,
is where
he's
are you,
away. No, he's away because he moves on to the
but where
Russo
are you
property.
anyway if he decides he's not going to build on the Buckley Man property, but decides to build on the rest of it? Sorry.
There's still under consideration is to do both pieces from him.
But when he was going to do both pieces, he was going to leave the AUL whole area up to the like the HOA people, you know, the association. He wasn't going to do anything with it.
And from where we started and going through the PIP process and the testing that was done with Mabbitt Associates and what they're finding, we're not in that same place that we were in the beginning. So we have PCB that we know. There's other contamination there. So the facts of what's been done so far are not the same as in the beginning. So his options are changing as well. Okay? Again, those new homes are adjacent to that AUL. If he doesn't clean it up, just think about it. If he doesn't clean it up, how is he going to sell somebody a home? Exactly, you wouldn't buy there. Would you buy there? You wouldn't buy there. So is it, right, so is it, what's that?
She'd have 3 bulletin
Right.
boards.
Right. So I circle back to the idea of, isn't it in his interest if he's trying to do a residential development to clean it up? Because he's going to have to convince somebody, I'm not going to buy it. I wouldn't buy it unless I was convinced. It's a significant amount of money. So what I'm saying, just to sum, these things are, I feel like they're aligned, but we're apart. In a sense, like, I get it. And there are requirements that need to be followed as far as the contamination, the cleanup, that we haven't, we're on a standstill right now because I know, Sandy, we talk about this, we haven't passed it. You know, getting to that phase 2 scope of work and so forth. And I'm concerned that it should at least be vetted out to see if we can come to a common agreement, I would think. Because if we don't, and then we move on to different steps, when we go to X, Y, and Z, and we say, well, we want a grant, or we want this. And then they look back and they say, you had this or that. We need to be prepared to be able to defend those positions because other pots of money are a competitive process. There's other people that are concerned. So, you know, what have we done? If we had an opportunity and we got bullish on it and we didn't want to go that way, that might hurt us competitively. So I'm concerned. I'm just throwing it out there.
Honestly, we don't even know what's there.
I
You know, the testing process was thwarted and stopped, and it was stopped for a reason. We don't know what's there at this point in time.
And I don't disagree. They stopped and they didn't go much further.
And let me just just to chime in on the cleanup process, and I mean, it is proposed to be residential, so this right there, the sort of the threshold is pretty high, but there's performance standards, so there's regulations and there's a framework and there's performance standards that they would need whoever would move forward with the cleanup and try and close this out and demonstrate there's no risk. There's performance standards, and it's not happening in a vacuum. Certainly there's a PIP group. There are folks watching the sampling, the results. It seems to be on DEP's radar screen. They evaluated the old report, issued a notice of non-compliance, and really precipitated the more work and additional sampling. So I mean, I will say that there are a standard that needs to be met, performance standards for the regulation, in order to demonstrate that it has been, they have a thorough understanding, evaluate the risk, and that's where, again, we can all look at their data and what their conclusions are, and see if it's in accordance with the regulations and properly conducted. And then if there is a risk, then they need to clean it up and address it, either via an AUL, digging out contaminated, so however that means are, like, obviously we're ways off of that, but that's the process. And so, and again, I would just comment that it does appear to be on many people's radar screens. I mean, there is a PIP process that's out there. DEP seems to be engaged in it as well. So, whether they audit or not, like my understanding is most of the audits they do are targeted based on sort of the level of concern from the site, and so it seems to be on their radar screen. So, I guess that's what to say about the.
Do we have any contact with the DEP? Just are we prodding them? Just to sort of understand what's happening with them?
Sure, somebody in your audience here is prodding them.
Yeah, I know Sandy and Dave. Yeah, so myself and Paul, we had a phone conference with Rebecca Woolley, and we had two phone calls. We had one prior to Sandy meeting with, and I think it was Dave Diamond met with Rebecca Woolley, and then we had one afterwards. And I mean, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I kind of walked away from the conversation thinking that, when you're in these situations where you have a contaminated site, you have somebody who is willing to work with you to clean them up, you should really work pretty hard to work with them, because they don't all fall out of the sky. I mean, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but she because the same.
Person's willing to work with you to clean up the site. I think that's dreamland at this point. The cost and the liability of that site. I just can't imagine him picking it up.
So I think it seems like perhaps that a little bit of walking down the road to see if we could get to that point needs to be explored, as opposed to say, no, it can't happen. I think there's kind of a, I think probably some, and I'm not disputing it, but there's a reluctance to say we can work, we can't work with them, we can't work with them. And as opposed to say, well, let's try to work the issue and see if we can work them. If you come at the end of the day that we can't, so be it. But I don't think, it's a weird position for me, to be honestly, in the sense that, I'm in between where, when developers come in and they're doing a project and they're trying to deal with the neighbors, and, you work through the issues of what are real, and somebody wants to stop a development project, and you have to work through that conversations to get to what the real issues are and whether or not somebody's just trying to stop a project. And so I feel like we need to bridge the gap a little bit between, okay, here's somebody that's willing to do a project. Well, he's not some fantastic, I'm not saying he's the greatest thing since sliced bread, but you work with what you have. Like, we can't pick who we have to work with sometimes, so we have to work with that person. And if you get to the point where you don't think it's workable, so be it. But just to, at the get-go, say we can't work is not a good way to approach this. It really isn't in this particular instance, because the stakes, to me, are much higher than an ordinary situation, because we have a contaminated site.
I just want to go back. What makes you think he's going to clean up that property?
What makes you think he's not?
The cost, the liability.
So if we get to that, if we start down a pathway and he may say,
Jim, I'm not doing this pathway, it's just reality. Shrieking, sorry.
no.
I don't wanna get you.
Okay, let's say hypothetically it costs them $10 million to clean up of the property. Okay? He might say, yeah, I'm not going to do it. But we haven't had walked a little bit of the conversation to say whether he's going to stay or go. I think from his point of view, he thinks most people want him to go and go away and forget about developing the property. I mean, I'm just being frank about, you know.
No, that's not true. That actually isn't true.
The messaging that he hears is that people, and granted, I talk to my kids, sometimes they misunderstand what I say, so I totally get miscommunication, but I don't think he thinks that people want to work with him at this point.
We need to work with them. Yeah, we just need to work with them on something other than dumping 200-unit factory town in the middle of.
And
Strip mining the sand out of
can we discuss where we started with this project, which was he was going to remove more than 1.3 million cubic yards of earth from that site. He wasn't particularly speaking about, misunderstandings. He wasn't particularly clear about how much earth was going to be removed, how many truck trips that was going to require to remove all of this earth. And that's sort of what started the neighbors feeling like they weren't being dealt with honestly, because one of them came forward and said, I think that this actually means that this many trucks are going to travel our street every day, and he accused that individual of making up math. And and we've had questions about the cleanup of this site for a long time, and he's promised, oh no, it was perfectly cleaned up, don't worry about it, no need for testing. So we're here because some really industrious and smart individuals who are local have worked really hard to get this, and to allow the developer to then say, oh well, I'd be happy to clean it up. One of the things I'm sure he'll say is, if you allow me to remove 1.5 million cubic yards of earth, because he can sell all of that soil and then he can pay for the cleanup, which is we're back to where we started.
I think that's a great point. So the point is, where we're at now, we haven't had a next conversation with them to say, how can we get to that? You're assuming he's going to go back to 1.5 million cubic yards of gravel. He may not. He may not do that. He may say, you know what? I want to do a different, I need more residential units. I can't rely on X number of gravel to be removed. I'll keep the gravel the same way it is.
I think you hit max density on that.
No, hold on. So,
Hey guys.
We don't even.
As much as this is a useful conversation, and it really is a useful conversation, because ultimately, I think the only way this site is going to get cleaned up is if somebody with Placido's resources sees a way of making money, and the folks in this room come down believing that the benefits far outweigh the costs. If that doesn't happen, then we're in trouble. But if it does happen, we need to make it happen. We need to work together to make it happen. So even though this conversation for the last 30 minutes had very little to do with public health, it has had an awful lot to do in the long term with solving a very significant environmental problem that we all face. And some of you very close to it, and the whole town really as well. So that's why I've been kind of letting this conversation roll on, even though it's been a little redundant and not exactly our purview here, but it's hugely important for the town. And we do need to come to some understanding, I believe, because, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for this, but who cares, I'm old. I've been in this town in a regulatory process for decades, and I've seen lots of developers come and go. And over the years, I've kind of put them into two large categories. Those I wouldn't trust with anything, and those whom I believe say something and mean it, and you can rely on it being there again tomorrow. I've heard some stories suggesting other things have gone on, but I've known Tom DePlacido for a while. Of these two groups, he's in this one. And so I would like to see the town, if it can somehow work together with this particular developer, make it possible to get this mess cleaned up and at the same time allow him to do his work and end up at the end of the day making a profit. I think there probably is a way to do that. It may not involve 1.5 million cubic yards of gravel. I
So
have no idea how
these
that's
are
going to
all
work.
good
Sandy?
points. Can I just say, as far as the Board of Health goes, we came with some, concerns that you could possibly do in the interim. This is all a ZBA issue here, because right now the ZBA has a letter out to Mass Housing, whether or not he's even still eligible. He doesn't have site control. So as far as the Board of Health goes, can you do anything that I mentioned? Do you have any comments that you could send to the ZBA about your concerns? Can you post the site for catch and release? What is in your purview that you could do at this meeting, before we all go home?
Do we have testing from the pond that shows that there's arsenic? The arsenic levels in the pond are high. Do I recall that from 6 months back?
Yes, there is arsenic in the pond.
And does arsenic concentrate in fish? I'm just curious.
It's probably accumulated in their tissue.
So if someone were to eat the fish?
Will be a high enough, well, that's the question, is it high enough to cause any issues? We don't know that.
So.
But you could just do a policy of just catch and release without saying anything about the fish being contaminated, because nobody's caught a fish and had it tested.
Is that us or is that the Conservation Committee? I have no idea.
Well, look, if we had the last time the Board of Health closed a pond down actually was Highland Lake. And it happened years and years ago when a sewer pipe let go. And sewage from the prisons went right into the lake. That was the last time. All right? We had a known release of a hazardous material, and it was very clear we had to do something immediately. And the same day it happened, the chairman of the Board of Health was out there posting up signs. So yeah, we have a record of doing this when we have a clear indication that there is contamination, because you can see it in that particular case. We have some data to suggest that in this area around Eagle Brook, there are some latent concentrations of arsenic and I think maybe some other elements that are a little higher than you would normally expect in a rural area. And it could be geological, it could be from some other man-made source, we don't really know for sure. What the benefit is exactly, reminding people that you generally don't eat fresh fish that you catch in urban areas, I don't know. It's not clear we have the data to support that kind of, scaring the bejesus out of people. I'm not really sure that we can go there.
I mean, from a technical perspective, they have an incomplete data set and they haven't done a risk evaluation, so it's just unknown if there is a risk or it isn't. That's sort of, I guess from a regulatory standpoint, I think that's where it's at.
So who's paying for all that testing, or who would be paying for that additional testing going forward?
If somebody was going to do additional testing, that would be for the town to decide. If they wanted to pick up, and there's certainly questions about doing testing and who would own that data and have to resolve it and so do the risk assessment and sort of move forward. There's a lot of questions with collecting data.
So once
do you
you
even
get
have
the
access?
data.
Do you even have access? Is it even on the town's property? A lot of questions there about additional testing for sure.
I feel badly because I think you guys are literally between a rock and a hard place and 1.5 million cubic yards of gravel. Unless I wouldn't even know what to suggest in terms of people have already contacted the state and all sorts of different regulatory people within the state, but where's the money going to come from to clean it up if it doesn't come from a developer?
Well, first of all, we have to know what's over there and what is the impact on the environment. Is it in the water? Maybe, maybe not, but nobody knows, right?
So again, we need to figure out who has the legal wherewithal or the liability to do some additional testing, and that depends on who owns the data. It's private property, so who controls that access to that part of the process? Is that the zoning board? Is that the planning board? Is that, I don't think it's the Board of Health.
I mean, we talked about this a little bit, I guess.
I haven't had dinner yet.
So if you, so first of all, the testing I think the saying is asking for, I would at this particular point is asking for the town of Norfolk to do, because at this point nobody else has come up to do that testing, and we would have to. It would be appropriation from the town to do that testing, and then if we were to do that testing, I think from a town standpoint we'd have to understand for the townspeople as a whole, the larger town, the risk and benefit of doing that. You know, the one side presuming that it's contaminated, the other side is that you don't presume everything is contaminated, and then in between is you test. Well, so there's pluses and minuses to doing that testing, and then I don't know the responsibility of it. We can, I mean,
Rich, let me jump in. I mean, we did have a conversation about this, and we thought that the very first and immediate step was to contact, to get the pump test data and see what was available out there for data already, and see if there was an issue. So I think that was the very first step that we talked about, and maybe once we get that data, then we can take a look at what what that data says,
And we may own that data. We just got to get our hands on it.
Okay.
To get back
we
to
do
Sandy-
own the data. It's just a matter of getting our hands on it.
To get
Yes.
back to Sandy's issue about posting signs, I don't think we can post signs if we're not sure that something is there. I mean, like
There
you
is a
said, we're
state
gonna-
policy.
I'm sorry?
You can post the state sign which says a warning to the general public about pregnant women and children and women who could become pregnant should not eat the fish from a fresh body of water. That is a state regulation. You could have that sign up without any qualms about testing fish.
Ann Middleton, 6 Brett's Farm Road. I talk to people who are down there fishing, kids, I make remarks. The fish there are not big enough to eat.
Don't know what?
The fish there are not big enough to eat.
Seen
big ones? All right, for 20 years, I've never seen a big one. I'm just saying, and some of the kids say, no, we're just fishing them and we throw them right back in. Just for the record, you know what side I am on. I'm just stating a fact. Thank you.
She's at Brett Farm.
All right.
He's on Breast Farm.
Can I ask just one random question of you, Rich? Does
Sure.
any of that housing, the 200 units, does that apply to the affordable housing quota that we're required to
Yes.
meet? Okay,
Yeah.
just curious about that.
25%. Yeah.
So Sandy, you had signs around the pond. What else were you asking the board to do?
Part of the issue is we have a subdivision proposed without knowing where the contamination is. Would you write a letter to the ZBA stating your concerns that there should be a buffer zone around any contamination that is found? Because we don't know where it is, and he may have, I think it's backwards. He cited a subdivision, then we found contamination, but we need to know where the contamination is so that the subdivision will not be that close to it, and houses won't be that close, nor the infrastructure like a wastewater treatment plant. So you have to at least state, that you want a buffer zone between known contamination, because even if he cleans it up, it probably still should be monitored and become part of an AUL into perpetuity. And in fact, nobody's really even discussed who's going to own the AUL, because the LaRusso land, people shouldn't have any burden of the AUL because they didn't own the original Buckley and Mann, but they are going to be part of Abbeville, and I don't know how those houses are going to have some of the responsibility of an AUL when it's it's really a deed restriction.
It's a great point, Sandy, and I think there was an elegant solution. Sort of we work with Dan Hill is that they, as part, there was a condition in the ZBA, so the draft. One of the conditions was they got to complete their phase 2, and have an understanding of what's going on the site before it be permitted. So that was the hurdle that they needed to cross. And a phase 2, and this sort of goes to the cleanup question. And I mentioned it before, there are performance standards and there's a framework that they absolutely need to meet. And under the phase 2 scope of work, it's delineate the full extent of the contamination, know what the exposure is, does that pose a risk? And if it does, then they go to mitigation. And that comes from the phase 2. So if they completed their phase 2 and had a full understanding of the site, then it seems like then they'd be going in with we would have our eyes wide open, we'd know and they would as well, and if necessary. But you talked about the AUL and there's some contamination there. Maybe there's other contamination, or maybe it's less contaminated. Like, we don't know, but that very well could affect. I've done a fair amount of development projects, and when you have contamination, oftentimes you can change the development to address the contamination that's there and avoid those kind of risks. And it's a fluid process where you can change it up. If instead of putting a subsurface parking garage, you put a parking lot there. And there's ways to address the contamination. So it was I thought a fairly elegant solution to your question, is that the ZBA did work in that they needed to have a full understanding of the contamination, complete their phase 2 scope of work prior to, I think, the permitting, as part of the permit condition.
For the Russo property, is that what you're talking about?
No, that was the man.
Oh, that was for the man property.
All right, but the phase 2 scope of work is really supposed to be done by May 2020, right?
Yeah.
And so, see, I don't know how the timing of all this would work, because we have a comprehensive permit that's been 2 years now in the public hearings. I almost don't see how we can issue any kind of comprehensive permit until we know where everything is, so that, these kinds of changes are going to be significant if he has to move a wastewater treatment plant, or if he has to move homes or something. I just don't see how the process works, and I appreciate Rich's point. We have to work with somebody if we want it cleaned up, or it stays the way it is. That's probably the bottom line.
But to my point, he stopped. We didn't stop him.
Yeah,
Right,
no,
right.
Correct. Yep.
So what would be your recommendation to us? To the Board of Health, should we send a letter to the ZBA addressing Sandy's concerns?
If memory serves, we drafted a series of points, and
We did.
Some of them were like dust and noise, and there was a series of criteria that still stand. That was still in the ZBA draft permit process. But to address Sandy's question and a lot of the questions are here, how do we know, and is there a risk, and that was the solution to that, is they really needed to have a full understanding of site conditions before the permit would move forward. So.
But that's for the old project. We're talking about a new project.
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Same project.
Same project.
Aren't you talking a new project? Aren't you talking about a new
No,
project?
no.
No, just on PCBs in the old project.
So back to the chairman's comment earlier, I think some of this might be helpful just to have a non-Board of Health, non-Abbeville public hearing to talk about the fundamentals of the permitting process and what happens and what takes place, and sequentially. Because for one, you have to have a permit first before you get financing. So he's got to get this thing financed. He's going to have to get a final site approval letter from Mass Housing afterwards if he gets a permit. And then he's got to go get somebody to finance this to get the money. So there's a lot of things that got to happen before a lot of these other things can happen. So it seems like it's more of a fundamental. Some question you're asking about, it's like a chicken and egg thing. He can't, if he doesn't get a permit, he's not going to get a final approval letter. He's not going to get financing to do the project. So they're all kind of wrapped in together to a degree. So they had that condition about doing the phase 2 work. When that work happens, if it impacts the 40B permit that's issued, he's going to have to come back or make a change. You know, it's a dynamic process. It's, I don't know how, anyway, so we're off the,
Well, yeah.
a little bit. But I'm just saying that we have to kind of maybe talk through the process and what happens, what doesn't happen in relation to what is being asked, I guess. I guess that's probably the better.
Well, perhaps, Sandy, I mean, the ZBA's meeting tomorrow, right? And so that is certainly a question you can raise with them. I mean, we already have a working relationship with the ZBA. We've been trying to basically provide that kind of environmental assessment piece and a little bit of internal knowledge that we have about, you know, the science and the health issues that are surrounding projects like this. It sounds as if, from what Paul was just describing, that they made a lot of progress in basically having a kind of fact-driven way of looking at how you protect the people who are eventually going to be settling in on that site and buying houses and calling it their homes. And so maybe we need to let that course run its course and simply allow the permitting process to happen, and then say, all right, the way we're looking at this, are there sufficient protections so that the people that buy these houses are not going to get sick and their kids are not going to get in trouble playing around where they're playing. But let's base it on what the strategy, the best strategy is for dealing with the contamination that's on that site. If it means digging up most of it and carting it away, maybe burying some, whatever it is that makes the most sense and does the best job of protecting the health of the community, let's make that decision based on the best data we have available. And it does mean getting more data. I mean, there's something I think we've always agreed upon. You know, we got a helter-skelter kind of set of sample sites out there, and we need to focus really on mapping where those hot spots are and how far do they go sideways and how far down, and do they actually have an impact on groundwater quality. All those things we got to take care of. I think the applicant understands that. I'm hoping he does.
What? No, come on.
He has to understand what he needs to be able to get a permit to build that subdivision. And that's what we're talking about. He's not going to get the permit.
Suppose he doesn't, he drops it, like when people drop down the hospital land and says, listen, this is gonna be too much, too expensive.
Yep, it could happen.
It's a pain in my tail end. Sitting there with the problem that has fundamental problems for this town, the water quality. That we just don't know. We don't know what's there. And right now, we're putting everything in the basket that he's gonna move ahead on this project.
Because it's in his best interest to. As soon as it no longer is in his best interest to, because now the PCBs have jacked up the price of remediation by some value above which he doesn't see a profit margin, yeah, he could walk. Absolutely, that could happen, as it happened over in Southwood.
Let me give you a scenario that I think could happen here, and I think it's slightly sleazy, but, you know, it's business. And that is that a corporation's created that buys that land, the Buckley Man land, sells a portion of it off to Deflacido. Over here, they have something they can build on. There's no contamination on it. The corporation owns this other piece that's contaminated, and the corporation, farther on down the road, goes bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
What happens then?
What happens then is shame on us for letting it happen.
Well, what would prevent it from happening right now? I'm just saying that.
I don't know.
That's a businessman's view of.
All right, well, anyway.
But you're already stuck with a contaminated piece of property, whether someone purchases it and sets it aside and does nothing with it, or we do nothing with it now. It's still contaminated either way.
I'm saying the town has a potential problem here that involves the water and the health of the citizenry.
Well,
Don't
we could get
recognize
town
that.
water up there.
You're hanging everything on a businessman going ahead with the project.
I disagree with you in that we're still going to be
What's your
stuck.
other option?
Well, what's your other option?
My other option is either the town put up the money to get, do some testing to see what's actually there, and then based on that, go get some money from the state, work with the state
I'm not sure what the legalities are involved because it's a privately owned piece of property at this moment in time.
This has to go beyond a private piece of property. Because it's a private piece of property, it doesn't mean other people have to die.
I certainly understand that, but again, I don't know what the legalities are involved with doing testing on a private property.
Yeah, I guess I'm not an attorney, but like, you know, you go out there, it's, you know, wouldn't it be trespassing on the property unless they take it by eminent domain, and then the town would be on the hook for the clean, you know, and then, you know, again, it's a lot of what ifs, but.
Right, so-
But generally, when you know, when me as an LSP need to have generally approval to go on a property to test before you would go do that. Prior to doing so, all I would say is sort of consult is you would want to have the discussion about sort of the liability about collecting the samples on the town versus the current responsible party doing so. So that would be my word of caution, you know, about that, you know, if we're going to have that conversation.
So just to be clear, correct, emphasis for tonight, we cannot go on that property without consent from the property owner. In fact, they raised a little bit of concern that we already were out there before. They're letting it slide, but the fact that we did split sampling, and so they're aware of things that happened on that property without their consent evaluation. So they're letting it lie. You know, it's in the past, but to go forward, absolutely, we would need the consent of the property owner to be able to go out there. We can't trespass.
So for the town, though, we do have a way to get town water up there because the water is under the bridge in the causeway now. And you could, you know, if you're concerned about, you know, the safety of that neighborhood for water, why not bring town water up there, have a betterment, go to the town, you know, apply for funds. I mean, these are all problems that I think we need to discuss. Like Rich said, we have a bigger discussion, but with the neighborhood, so that we can come up with, well, what is the problems? What are some possible solutions instead of just a one-track solution? You know, we don't know what contamination level is there. We don't have all that data, but we still have neighbors that have opinions, and you have only just a handful here. Here it is, the first week of vacation. You know, do it when people can come and have a conversation. It's important for the whole town.
Well, that's what the PIP process is supposed to be about too, except now it's gotten cut off at the pass.
Because we don't have an LSP of record, but we still have a very strong PIP presence, and I do have contacts. We could have a meeting without the LSP of record, I think, because we're a PIP. Is that correct? We could call a meeting and no LSP of record shows up, but we could still discuss these issues.
I'm always happy to show up, and absolutely, I'm an LSP and happy to talk. So as we are tonight, and we'll just continue.
Well, thank you, Paul. I'm not sure how much more progress we're going to make on this tonight. The ZBA is going to be discussing this project tomorrow, I assume. It's on the agenda. All right. All I know right now is DePlacido hasn't walked yet. Now, when he does, then things are going to go sliding downhill pretty quickly. We've got to go to Plan B, whatever that even looks like. But as long as he is still interested in this project and he still thinks he can make money on it, we need to figure out some way to work with this gentleman.
But when you say that, what I hear as being part of that neighborhood is, geez, we're going to have to make some concessions to DePlacido. Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're saying?
Concessions? Concessions are what is in your best interest. That's what the concession is.
Just say concessions. So what are the concessions you're thinking about, and you're thinking about? Are we going to let DePlacido go ahead, develop that land without doing the testing, and take out that segment that he'll put into the package?
No.
Then what concessions should be made here for DePlacido?
You're the one making concessions. I'm not. What I'm saying is make it in the best interest of the town for him to develop that land, which means we take care of a major problem, I hope we all agree, that needs to be solved. That's the benefit to us.
Part of me hears you're in a bind, let's put this on the back of the neighborhood by what other concessions are gonna make to Placido to degrade our neighborhood in order to take care of this issue that we don't have any other mechanism to take care of. We're dependent upon a businessman coming in and doing it.
Well, your characterization of the degradation process is a little hard to understand because he's trying to sell houses of substantial quality and of assumed price
And he's also
to a large population of people. They're not gonna wanna live in a degraded neighborhood, I don't think. So,
We feel our neighborhood was degraded by 60 trucks, 18-wheelers going across it every day for 8 years. That was a big degradation when he talked about
Yeah.
taking out all that soil.
right,
I mean, I'm sure
right.
you wouldn't-
Construction, hey, look, I agree with you. Construction's a messy process.
It's not construction, there's something else he was doing here, and he's not, I
Well, look,
understand-
let's not get into that. That's not a board health issue. I'm just talking about what kind of deal can we make to serve all of our interests? It's gotta be, I believe, what the neighbors believe to be in their best interest. I firmly believe that. It's not just the town overall getting a problem off our back. It's you all as well, feeling as if, in the long run, this was better for me than otherwise, than if it didn't happen. So I agree, we need to work together to figure out what that looks like for everybody.
I guess we look forward to seeing his proposal.
Exactly.
Yep.
Work in progress.
Yep.
Can I ask a question that's off on the side here? I just
We've been out there for a while now, but what do you mean? Okay, one last question. It's after 10 o'clock, folks.
I just wanted to know if it's under your purview, all the mosquito spraying companies that have sprouted up and they're
Yeah.
coming in and spraying lawns, Mosquito Joe, things like that with various kinds of pyethrons and setting up a perimeter. We're involved with pollinators and setting up pollinator environments. And we see this as somewhat of a counter to the work we're trying to do.
I agree with you. I'm a beekeeper, so I find all of those products horrifying, and I agree with you. I think that we should.
You know, the whole concept
that.
that you create a dead zone around your yard versus, you know, just apply some insect repellent. So I'm just wondering if we're doing anything about that?
Let's talk to this guy.
Well, I'm also a beekeeper myself in the past.
beekeepers here.
Well, not anymore. I became highly allergic to them, so I've had to let the hobby go. But if you're a certified pest control operator, you're not allowed to kill bees.
Except they're doing it.
They're doing it, and
Because you have to notify, if you notify them that you have bees and stuff, they'll stay away. It's a
They don't.
no-touch zone.
Except they're not.
Well, then you can report them to the license,
Yeah. And that's
the
what
state
we're
who
doing
licensed them.
on a
If they're
case-by-case basis.
if they're an applicator and they're deliberately, poisoning your bees,
But
there's re-
understand, if it's killing mosquitoes,
Killing everything.
it's killing bees.
Well, these companies do kill insects, that's correct.
Yes, bees.
But you have to notify the location of your bees, you have to let them know you have bees, so you know, touch them. It's supposed to be county too, county mosquito control.
So that's not something you deal with.
So
It's
something
not
we can
regulated by the
move-
town board.
No, it's a state board.
You
State
get
pesticide- State
notification.
pesticide board.
Well, from the mosquito control project, we get
Right.
notifications.
Yes, but
That's
al-
separate from these guys.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, if you see anybody in your neighborhood, and they're commercial applicators, you have bees, you call them up and let them know, you have bees.
Yeah, we're just hearing horror stories of people just feeling the spray on them, middle of the day, wrong time to do it. And lots of hive deaths.
Do they talk to their neighbors?
Yeah, these are neighbors spraying neighbors, right? I mean,
Exactly. Not every neighbor is in the same mindset.
Oh.
And, I can talk to my neighbors, but people in Florence do their.
Right, and bees fly up to 2 miles to go get pollen and nectar, so if they're flying through these neighbors' yards and getting killed.
Franklin, from our, 2 miles down the road, you're well into Franklin. And there's mosquito kill signs all over the place. So the Board of Health from Norfolk about it.
Sounds like we just need to create some awareness.
Correct, you gotta communicate.
Newspaper articles.
Good idea.
There you go.
I was gonna say something else, I forgot.
There's always next time.
Oh, yeah, how was your cruise?
Signs are good,
3
too.
weeks of fun and a little crazy.
Signs are good, too.
And
They're
10.
fine.
Go ahead.
I haven't had dinner yet, by the way.
What-
Just thought I'd
What else
mention
do
that.
we have?
Am I getting
You should
hungry?
go
No,
home.
I'm hangry. It's fine.
I lost my orange paper.
Oops, I can take yours?
Did you take mine?
I probably
Yes, you
did.
Okay.
We still have to do, we still have a bunch of
All right,
things to do.
thank you all.
Okay, good
We
night.
will talk about this some more.
Do we still have a bunch of things to do?
I don't know, do we? Yeah, what's on the list?
The minutes.
Well, we're
You
supposed
you
to
guys are on the list.
appoint agent appointments.
Yeah.
Can we just do that?
Yeah, just go,
quickly?
this is quick list.
Okay.
All right. Agent appointments. Is Tom Houston still on our list? Okay. Well, it's Wade's boss.
Oh, okay.
He hasn't showed up for a year or more.
But
Tom?
he might.
He's still around.
Is it?
Yeah, we don't really
It's
need
for
him.
us? All right.
Oh, well, he owns the company.
Well, I know he owns the company,
Oh.
but Wade is the person that I think we rely on for the
Yeah,
service.
but he does fill in Wade's absence.
Okay. So on this list, we have Wade, whom you've met. Tom Houston's his boss. You all know Betsy. Carol Green's the town clerk. Mark Orem we haven't met yet, but he's our sanitarian. Hillary you probably know.
Yes, I do.
And Ed Nolan, if you know Ed.
I know too.
All right.
Yes.
So these are all reputable folk, and we're just making them
Perfect.
agents of the Board of Health.
Awesome.
Okay? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. MRC updates.
Everything is going well. We're meeting tomorrow. We, being Betsy, myself, and our public health nurse, are meeting at the senior center to try and continue to develop the ZDS plan. But things are going well.
How did that emergency thing at the senior center go that was sponsored by Representative
It was
Dooley?
excellent.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Okay.
Excellent.
Wow.
Yeah, it was awesome.
I'm sorry I couldn't do it. I had to go to work, but I'm
Yeah, no, it was great. We all got like a go pack. It was
Cool.
great.
Good. Maybe we could expand that to maybe more of a public thing than just the senior center. We can talk about that some other time.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
The dioxane issue.
The dioxane issue. So this is a continuing, I put together a little summary of what's been going on based on reviewing the correspondence file, which I've been doing since I started on the Board of Health. So I've been looking at the landfill semi-annual testing from 2017 and 18, and it indicated that there was 1,4-dioxane present. So on May 20th, I met with Wayne Perry of Stantec, the company that does the testing, and also Bob McGee to discuss the test results. And there was a little bit of history. In 2014, DEP, Mass DEP required municipalities to test for 1,4-dioxane. Any levels above the Mass Contingency Plan limits were required to be reported to DEP, but after the initial reporting, there was no requirement by the municipality to continue reporting or to really do anything about it. So the Gold Street wells, although not in a Zone 2 aquifer, are geographically not that far from the landfill. I asked Bob if the wells had ever been tested for 1,4-dioxane, or the new Holbrook well had been tested, and Bob investigated with Russ Tierney of Whitewater, the company that tests our wells. And Russ responded on June 10th, and what he said was, after discussions with Mass DEP, looking at UCMR3 and EPG, I don't know what that means, it has been determined that none of the wells in Norfolk have been sampled for 1,4-dioxane. The Mass DEP does not require this testing at this time, and if they had any reason to believe there could be some issue, they would have required Norfolk to test for it. However, per Mass DEP and EPG, the new well field on Holbrook Street will be sampled prior to startup. It was not sampled during the initial water quality testing because, again, it was not required. In addition, after many conversations with Mass DEP, we agreed that it would be in the best interest of the town to sample the Gold Street well. And we will sample both wells during the next round of samples and pass on our pricing for this test. So,
Fran,
anyway,
congratulations.
that's happening.
So was there a requirement in 2014 and then it lapsed? Or?
No, they just decided, emerging testing, is that the word that, is it Rich? Who is the LSP?
Paul.
Paul mentioned emerging testing. They come up with these new chemicals that need to be tested for based on, I guess, looking at the environment and what they're finding in the environment and what things are carcinogens or possible carcinogens. And in 2014, they started asking municipalities to start testing for dioxin. So,
And then they found it
at the landfill.
at the
Landfill.
So why were they testing at the,
They do testing of the landfill. There's a whole slew of testing that do semi-annually.
Okay.
Makes its way down through the landfill.
Yeah.
They're worried
Okay.
about contaminating
Right,
groundwater.
the groundwater, to see what's happening with the groundwater.
I used
So,
to walk my dog
a
over
whole other education.
Don't drink the water.
So
Tell your
anyway,
dog not
to be
to eat it.
continued, but I thought you would like to know
Interesting.
how that took a while
Wow.
to make that happen.
Persistence. She persisted. Hey, guess what? You got it to happen.
We'll see.
I sure as hell hope they don't find any.
I know, exactly. I do too, but that would make me feel fine.
Nice joke.
Betsy's
I know,
honestly.
Betsy's found this.
I haven't had dinner yet, so I'd share that.
My goodness.
All right,
Really hungry.
That was it.
so is this meeting schedule okay?
Sure.
July 16th, August.
Want to leave me a wallet?
I gotta check this.
All right, I've got our final regulations all printed, ready to be signed, the 6 copies.
Oh.
Gosh, I don't have a, may I have a, pen?
Make it official August 1st.
Back to, and just sign here, right?
Yep.
I'm holding this up because I only have one pen. I need another pen. Thank you.
August 1st. When did you get this part done?
She was kept leaving the room.
I printed it when you guys were having that really long, torturous
Yeah.
discussion.
Doing a lot of that tonight.
Oh, is this meeting adjourned?
No.
Not yet.
We're still signing documents.
Okay.
This was a fun first meeting. Thank you so much. Oh, many copies.
6 copies.
Missed one. Okay, so I can do this.
I cannot
24
make
weeks.
September 17th.
Okay. All right.
We can reschedule.
How about you, Eileen? Are these dates gonna work for you?
I am checking through. Let's see, we got July.
No, Fran, we can
16th.
maybe pick another.
I can do the 16th.
Well, if you have 2 people,
I got
Yeah.
the 20th.
that works, right?
I can do. All right, I can do the 17th. That does have to be my wedding anniversary, no problem. October 15th and November 19th and December 17th. I am good with all of those dates.
November 19th. When is Thanksgiving? Oh, it's the 28th, so that would be fine. And December.
When's Thanksgiving?
The 28th, actually. That's
Oh,
the-
wow, it's late.
It's
Okay.
late, 'cause it's the October 31st is a Thursday, and the week, yeah. So it's the 4th Thursday of the month, but because October 31st is a Thursday, it pushes all the Thursdays down. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Okay, I guess we can do it.
Okay.
So I have to make a motion that we
Adjourn?
adjourn.
Go ahead.
I make a motion that we adjourn the Board of Health meeting at 10:20 PM.
I second that motion.
Enthusiastically. All those in favor say aye. Aye, we are adjourned at 10:20.